My son CJ, 4, appears to have an entity bothering him. He calls him his fake dad, creepily enough. He's mentioned him for a while now, but anytime that we ask questions about fake dad, he usually changes the subject. At first, we laughed about it, thinking it was a strange name for an imaginary friend, but I'm starting to think that may not be the case. You see, recently it's been escalating. Last week, CJ told us that he used to have a fake mum, but she drowned in the ocean. Creepy, but we were driving back from the beach at the time. We asked if fake dad was with us, and he said no, and that he didn't really want to talk about fake dad. Tonight, my husband and I were eating dinner after CJ had gotten up to play, and we heard him say to himself, "Ouch, that was a bad idea. I should have never listened to him." We asked him what he meant, and he told us that fake dad had told him to walk across his new train track, his new birthday present that he loves. CJ told us that fake dad always tells him to do bad things like break his toys. He hasn't done this yet, but tonight was the first time he really opened up about fake dad. He also told us that fake dad gets mad when he hugs his real dad. He was pretty upset and told us that he doesn't like fake dad and wishes that he would leave him alone. As I'm sharing this, CJ started crying from his bedroom as well. I went to check on him, thinking that he was messing around and hurt himself or something, but the lights were still off and he had fallen off of the bed, which he has never done before. He was confused about how it could have even happened as well. This is escalating quickly now, and I'm just wondering what kind of entity this is and how I can help my son. Also, last night we heard a loud bang coming from CJ's bedroom. I went to check on him, but the lights were off and I could see CJ in bed, and honestly it looked like he was asleep. I was standing in the doorway trying to figure out what had caused the noise when my husband walked up behind me. Suddenly, CJ sat up in bed and said, "He told me that you could come." I asked CJ who told him that, and he then pointed to the corner of the bedroom and said, "Fake dad." I looked to where he pointed, and I swear to you that I could see a silhouette of a very large man standing in the corner in the dark. My husband saw the same thing and quickly turned on the light, but when he did, nothing was there. Well, we packed some bags and we left for the night. I mean, there was no way that anyone was going to sleep in that house, and honestly, I'm not sure I ever want to even go back there. We're at my aunt's house now, and we're going to talk to her priest this afternoon to see what we can do. It just feels like I'm living in a horror movie. I mean, what the heck is this thing, and how can I get it to leave my child alone? This happened about 17 years ago during summer break. My friend and I, we went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house was his grandparents', and the whole place felt super isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night we'd stay up late just sitting by the water and whatnot, listening to the kind of deafening silence that you only get in the countryside, and just talking for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff or something. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try and hitch a ride. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we started walking. When we got there, it was midweek and no cars had passed at all. I guess most people were still at work in this city, and as it got later, we decided to just walk back in the end. On the way back, we passed through a few neighboring villages that were half abandoned. Honestly, it was a little bit creepy, but we kept ourselves entertained by singing and joking around to keep the fear at bay, I guess. It was getting dark though, and we still had about 4 miles left. Then we ended up on this road with dense forest on both sides, and suddenly we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark and honestly pretty unsettling, so we tried to joke about it, but deep down we all felt something was a bit off. Then my friend pointed and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit until one of us nervously said, "Must be some wild fireflies messing with us or something, right?" We laughed, but we all knew that those definitely were not fireflies. Keep in mind too that this was before cell phones, so no way to call anyone. We just had to keep moving and get back safely. As we got closer to the village, 2 of us heard a female voice coming from the forest suddenly. We looked at each other, both realizing that we had heard it, while the third friend was talking and didn't notice. I instantly got goosebumps because it sounded real, and the fact that I wasn't the only one who had heard it made it even more creepier. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house, but here's where it gets even weirder. So, in Slavic folklore, there's not just the Leshy, the forest spirit who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the Rusalka. Rusalki are these mythological female spirits often connected to lakes and rivers. They're usually described as beautiful women with long hair, sometimes said to lure people, especially at night, with their singing or their voices. We've been hanging out at this lake for so many nights, and then to hear mysterious female voices coming from the trees later on, near this said lake, it definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little bit too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down we all know that we saw and heard something that we really cannot explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest and strangest experiences that I've ever had. And yes, I still think about those nights at the lake and wonder what might have been watching or listening to us out there in the darkness. So, to protect the building itself, an old hospital, since it still exists and is vacant, I won't share its name and I'll be vague on the location, but I can assure you that the story is true. So I've been an EMT going on 19 years, and in those years I worked for many a different ambulance agency. One agency that I worked for was a hospital-based 911 inter-facility ambulance provider. Bit of a mouthful, I know, but that's what it's called. Now, because it was owned and run by a hospital company, many of our stations were in the hospitals themselves. One of these hospitals was a small rural hospital in a very small town in New Jersey. Years ago, smaller hospital companies like the one that I worked for were struggling financially, and larger corporations came in to buy out the smaller ones. Now, when this company came in, it decided to close permanently this hospital, and it was a gradual closure, but it happened. First, they shut down medical floors and other services, but kept the ER open, but only during normal business hours. This too was shut down months later, and our station here was pretty much unaffected, and we had 24/7 access to this now empty human hospital. Well, this wasn't a full-time station of mine. I did work out there on a handful of occasions before they sold the building and moved the station elsewhere. Now, imagine a hospital empty of anyone, except one small office for an EMS crew. Everything was still in the hospital rooms and offices, obviously, just lacking humans. It was creepy having this building once full of life and energy, now silent and dormant. Anyways, I came in one morning and the ambulance crew that I would be relieving was out still. I get to the station at around 4:45 a.m. for a 5 a.m. clock-in time. It was my first time at this station, and like many other humans, I was curious about what this empty hospital was like. So, since I had a little bit of time, I started walking around the old hallway silent and sort of just admiring what the building once was. I walked into the old chapel, the ICU, and other areas briskly to not forget I'm actually there to work soon. The EMS office was also just located off of the main entrance and the waiting room. I'm walking back to this EMS office to punch in, and as I'm walking back, I swear that I start hearing whispering, clear as day whispering voices. At first, I couldn't tell where they were coming from until I started getting closer to the waiting room. They got louder, but they were still whispers, if that makes sense. I was thinking, okay, well, maybe the one security guard that they had staffed was sitting in there on a phone being silent or something. But as I walked into the dark waiting room, nothing. No one, and the voices suddenly stopped. I punched in, and not much of my time was spent there during the day, but days later I was working there again, and this time I'm working with somebody else who has also never worked there before. Like me, she was just as curious about the building, so I took her around the areas that I knew of and told her about what I had witnessed only a few days earlier. We were once again walking back to our office near the waiting room. We were just talking when she interrupts me and asks me if I heard something. I didn't, but the silence revealed what she was hearing. Once again, we start hearing whispering voices, clear voices, but not hearing what is being actually said. As we try to find the source this time, it was coming from an old office just outside of the waiting room. As we walked in, nothing. It was empty except for a desk, and the voices stopped again. It was amazing that I had someone there to tell me that I wasn't just hearing things this time and witnessed exactly what I did. After that, I unfortunately never had a chance to work out there again as the hospital got sold and the station was relocated elsewhere and all that. But this building still exists to this day, vacant and waiting for redevelopment, I suppose. Last time I drove by it, it was untouched, surprisingly. I'm going to start off by saying and acknowledging just how absurd I might sound to all of you. And look, I know that you might think that I'm fabricating this story for internet clout or something, but I want to assure you that I'm not. I know that I cannot force you to believe me, nor will I attempt to do so, but I'm going to share what happened during one summer in my youth. First, I'll explain why I believe this wasn't a mistaken memory or hallucination too. So my family has lived on our land for nearly 200 years now. We have taken care of this land, and it has cared for us in turn. It is my ancestral home in a very real sense too. That said, our land has seen a few odd occurrences over the years for sure. I don't claim that our land is haunted or anything, but I do share my grandma's belief. She believes that our ancestors are looking down on us, protecting our family as a sort of guardian angel. It's a comforting feeling, at least to me, and I've never really felt unsafe on our land. My grandma has told me of some paranormal experiences that she has had over the years. Many occurred on our land, but one particularly relevant event to this story, it happened elsewhere. Now, during a cruise trip to the Caribbean, she and my grandpa were on shore on an island. My grandpa had gone ahead on a trail while my grandma had lagged behind a little bit, and as she was cresting a hill, a young girl ran up behind her. The child appeared to be scared of something, pointing to the bay and yelling that a ship is coming. My grandma tried to comfort the child, looking upwards towards the bay. She saw a sailing ship, like the ones from colonial times. The ship was far off, but she said that it was hard to discern, almost like a mirage. She said that she had called out to my grandpa before turning back to the child. However, when she turned back, the child was gone. No sound of her running off, no footprints, nothing. My grandma told me this story years ago, describing what she experienced as a bit of a time slip, an odd overlap of present and past that manifested in a, for a lack of a better term, ghost ship and child. I share this story to establish a bit of a history of odd occurrences that happened to some of our family members. It appears to be that more of them have occurred to me than my brother, despite us being pretty much inseparable when we were younger. But anyway, my time slip occurred during a summer when I was about 9 or 10. That summer, two friends had spent most weekdays with us as their mum had to work. Most days we would just play video games or explore the woods on our property or whatever, and it was on one of the days that we decided to explore when this event occurred. Our group of 4 were following my brother's dog. She was wandering through some game trails with us, making mild conversation, and we debated what would happen if we got lost. I said that we could eat some twigs and leaves, which solicited laughter from our group. After we walked through some brush, we came upon a fence line that I was familiar with but didn't see often. My memory then grows really hazy here. The others were with me, but they weren't involved in the time slip. My brother's dog had crossed the fence line, and I had followed despite the land that I was entering not being ours. I recall ducking under the middle strand of wire, and when I came up, the woods, they had just vanished. Obviously, as you can imagine, I was very confused, as anyone would be. I looked around for our dog, but I couldn't find her. I did notice, however, how similar the scene before me looked. It was a fenced clearing that was an acre in size. I recognized the acre-sized clearing where my home should have sat, and I was puzzled as to what I was even looking at. The fence looked much newer, and the 3 mesquite trees were nothing more than saplings. The windmill creaked with the wind, but a blade that was broken my entire life was now undamaged. The sun shone a little brighter than normal. The entire time I felt sort of dazed, like in a lucid dream almost. After a few moments, I got an uncanny feeling and decided to turn back. And when I crossed back, I turned and saw the woods had returned to normal. I cannot recall much after that, but that would simply be due to the event happening over a decade ago, I suppose. I know in some cultures that crossing a boundary of some kind could result in crossing over into another dimension or whatever. Though far-fetched, it could be another explanation besides a time slip, I guess, but despite trying to replicate the event, I have thus far been unable to. I wonder if anyone else has experienced this phenomenon and could possibly shed some light on what the heck it is that I encountered. This might be a bit of a long one, so please bear with me. When I was 9 years old, my best friend Matt's parents offered to take us and his 2 younger siblings to a place called Discovery Zone in the next city over, about 40 minutes away. We had dinner afterwards and then headed back to our town, where I would sleep over at Matt's house. We lived in a part of the east side of town that was pretty rough, and there was a large swath of undeveloped land between the main road and the entrance to our neighborhood. On either side of the access road, between the two, were prairies overgrown with brush and weeds, and really nothing to speak of for maybe about half a mile in any direction at that time. Matt, his older brother, and sister were crashed out, and I was awake looking out of the window of the red Chrysler minivan that we were riding in. Now, it's important to note that as a kid, I was afraid of everything. I really mean that too. I used to turn off the light and sprint up the stairs. I used to sleep with the covers all the way over my head, leaving only a small opening for air, and I wouldn't even dream of watching a horror movie. So as I'm looking out of the window into the empty prairie on the right, that was when I see her. Clearer than should have been possible thanks to the moonlight. A tall, frail woman, hunched over a bit, with long, thin, stringy hair. Everything about her was spindly, and I couldn't even tell that she was soaking wet, as if she'd just come out of a river or something. Then, as I fixated on her, she stopped walking and turned her head, and she saw me. As she raised her head to look at me, I realized that it wasn't a woman's head on her body, but that of like a horse or something, whose white hair was made grey and muddy by the water and the dirt. Not only that too, and although I couldn't see it perfectly, I knew that the horse's eyes were cloudy and milky, blind with age or disease perhaps. Now, here's the strange bit though. I wasn't afraid of her. In my mind, a voice was telling me that it was okay, that I had seen her and she had seen me now, and I didn't have to be afraid. My family and I are from Mexico, and I grew up in the Southwest, so I immediately equated what I saw with La Llorona, who all of us kids had heard of as a cautionary tale to get our butts inside before it got too late or too dark. I never told a soul about seeing her, and I never really thought about her again too. That is, until March of 2020. Now, during the COVID shutdowns, I spent a lot of time online, and much of that was on certain paranormal message boards. They used to be cool. One afternoon, I was scrolling through endless threads there when one caught my attention. Share your scary or paranormal experiences about Mexico. Reading through each of them was actually pretty fun, until I came upon this one from a guy who used to date a girl from Mexico. Her uncle owned a mango grove there, and while the guy and his girlfriend were walking through it one day, he kept noticing an old woman ducking behind the trees. Finally, he asked the girlfriend who the lady was, and she turned to look, just catching a glance of her. The girl grabbed her boyfriend by the wrist and instantly took off running without a word until they got back to the house. She breathlessly told her uncle that there had been an old witch spying on them, and that when she looked at her, the woman had a white horse head in place of her own. Upon reading that, every hair on my body was standing up, but it was the attached comment from another user that made my blood truly run cold. You see, his father and his friend had been partying in Mexico one night when they were young men, and were driving back when they saw a young girl walking along the side of the road with her back to them, hunched over. She was dripping with water, so they stopped to see if she was okay. When they approached her, she turned to face them, and they just took off sprinting back to the car because, again, she had a white horse head, and the friend said that its eyes were milky, clouded, and blind. Now, I could accept the argument that whatever I saw as a kid was just pure imagination, but how is it that I imagined the exact same woman that these guys saw? I looked for any precedent for La Llorona having a horse head and came up with nothing, but fast forward another few years when I went to Universal Studios Hollywood Horror Nights, and they had a La Llorona-themed haunted house, and wouldn't you know it, they gave her a skinned, bloody horse head. My husband, 23 and male, and I, 22 and female, have been on our wedding anniversary for over a week now. We have a camper in Cherokee, North Carolina that we've been staying in. We have an interest in abandoned things like towns and cemeteries and whatnot. So we decided that we would go and visit Connor Cemetery. It's near Couches Creek off of Newfound Gap Road, which is about 1.9 from the visitor center. Anyway, when we arrive to pull off close to where the trailhead is supposed to be, we get out and start walking towards the opening in the woods where there is a trail. The trail itself is visible, but you would have to be looking for it to see it. We're walking in, heading towards where the cemetery is supposed to be. I'm in the front looking down, checking for snakes and holes, and my husband is behind me. We've paused for a second, and he said, "Hey babe, look at that statue." I start looking around and say where, and he points to the direction. What I was expecting was like an angel statue that you would normally see in cemeteries. But that is not what this was. I look upwards further up the trail, and off to the side is what looks to be a 12 to 15 foot tall deer or elk statue. The statue looks like it was either made up of wood or wrapped in leather hide and looked preserved almost. The problem is that nowhere online had it mentioned this statue or anything of this sort. It starts giving me this uneasy feeling because it had a strange face and it was just a very weird place for something like that to be there. My husband then said that he didn't like the look at it at all and we should probably go. As soon as he said that, we turned around and left as fast as we could. Once we got back to our car, I told him that it just didn't feel right at all. He agreed with me and said that he saw a deer-like face with a snout and he thinks that he actually saw it blink and its right ear had moved, but not like a normal animal ear, but a full-on 360 rotation. I told him that what I saw was like an elk body with a camel mixed with an elk-like face. On the way back to our camper, I started thinking that I should have taken a picture of it, but unfortunately I just didn't think to do it at the time. Once we were back at the camper, we started researching things and we just could not find where this was ever listed or ever even seen before. We decided to go back to a local Native American bookstore that we had gone to previously and speak to the older lady who runs it there. We'd explained what had happened and she advised us to speak to the visitor center in the national park to see if anyone had something similar or if they knew of any native stories of something similar to this. She had also said that sometimes the things choose for you to be the only ones to see it. We had thanked the lady and then we left back to our camper. Now I'm here with all of you guys and thinking about what we may have possibly seen out there in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. If you have any information on what this could be, then please do let me know. We'll be going to the visitor center tomorrow and most likely we'll be going back into the woods to see if it's still there or not. My hunch is that it won't be. I'll start off by saying that this isn't the first time that I've experienced something paranormal. I've actually shared another story here before, but this one, oh boy. So the first event took place on my birthday. I had this stoner friend who did drugs all the time and gave me a hardcore LSD square. I, being a complete idiot, thought that it would make for a good birthday, so I just put the whole thing on my tongue and started sucking on it like it was prime Angelina Jolie's lips or something. My friend starts telling me that I'd have to wait about an hour for it to start kicking in and how the trip would sort of feel like, and he's telling me all this stuff and I start feeling like my stomach's being drilled all of a sudden. The room that I was in immediately shrank and it felt like I was going to choke. I tell him about it and he says, "Oh, it's probably kicking in already because it's your first time and you took the whole thing." So we get out of the apartment and sit in a garden outside of the building. It must have been like 8 p.m. by then. And while I'm sitting there, everything that had a texture became alive and it was really nice. The walls with tiny rocks on them, plants, all of it. My friend also put on some music and I was enjoying it. Little did I know. At this point, I start seeing people bursting in like flames. It was like a fire or something would flow from within each person that I saw, but it was different for everybody. Some people would come up to me and I would start having trouble breathing, and other people would have this beautiful soothing light coming from them that would calm my nerves. I was super sensitive at that moment. And it's kind of funny that I found it hilarious, I guess. Anyway, my friend and I started walking to a little bar to get a couple of beers. He stopped in the way to greet a dude, and I swear that I could suddenly read his thoughts. Like, I would know what he wanted to say before he even said it, and then he would. I started getting a bit nervous, but I expressed it with complete and utter silence. But when we arrived at the bar, I started hearing voices. They would repeat old conversations that I had heard when I was a little kid and completely forgotten about. Like me being a 2-year-old and hearing my mum talk to a neighbor about God and how she felt that we were abandoned in this world. Every word, every sentence in fact, hundreds of forgotten conversations flooded my head suddenly, and I would know why and when they were talking about those things. Amid this madness and psychosis, I could recognize a pattern in these memories. They were all dialogues that discredited God in some way or another. But as soon as I became aware of that, I started feeling like I was being pulled from my own body forcefully. I started freaking out, but my friend literally left me sitting by myself because he went to do something in the bathroom. And look, I know, what do you mean by being pulled out from your own body, right? Let me put it this way. So, you are your personality, right? Your thoughts, your feelings, memories, dreams, your soul, I guess you could say. That was what I felt was being taken away from me, and the more that I felt I was no longer in control, the more I would feel like I was losing my mind, like going crazy, never to return to myself ever again. Upon that realization, everything became visual too. I saw a literal bunch of figures all around the bar that I was at. Some were sitting next to people who were just having a good time, others were vibing and singing loudly to Viva La Vida by Coldplay. These figures, though, they were all black, and the only thing that I could notice in them was these red glowing eyes. But just before I completely lost my mind, I guess you could say, I heard another voice, but it wasn't in my head. It was like coming from within me almost. Leave this place. Something bad is about to happen. You don't belong here, my son. In perfect Spanish, which is my native language. That voice obliterated every other voice that I was hearing, and I immediately stopped feeling what I described a while ago. My friend had already come back, and so I grabbed him by his shirt. I said to him, something bad is about to happen. Let's get the heck out of here. And he went, nah man, you're just horror tripping. I knew that this was going to happen. And as he's yapping along, we suddenly hear people screaming and a flying bottle passed right between us and crashed against the wall that we were sitting next to. Then a huge fight broke out due to some drunk, dangerous people that happened to be there or something. My friend was terrified and started running out of the bar suddenly. We got out of there as quickly as we could, and as we were walking back to his house, he asked how I knew that that was going to happen. While my brain was, well, just malfunctioning, he said. But it was way too much to take in at that time. I didn't understand anything that had happened. Eventually, I came down from the trip and things started to become clear. I was no longer high, and I mean, I had practically been high all my life, and for the first time I was completely lucid. But I saw, I heard, and I felt it. And at that moment I felt like God was real, and I had felt him for the first time in my entire life. I mean, it couldn't have been anything else to me. I just knew. A week passed, and I'm in my room, and I decide to get on my knees and pray. I said that if he was really listening, that I wanted him to send somebody who could teach me how to look for him, how to connect with him, and if he did, that I would never walk away from him. The next day, I heard somebody knocking on my door at 6 p.m. I went to see who it was, and it's a neighbor that I had seen before, but I didn't really know him or talk to him very much. Hi neighbor, God bless you. I'm just stopping by to invite you to a Bible reading at my house. He named his house and street. It's the first Bible reading of many that will come, so I hope you'll join us. There'll be snacks and everything. My eyes watered instantly, and I said yes. And a little over a year has passed since then, and although I'm not a very religious person, I guess you could say, I do have a relationship with God, and I can 100% affirm that my heart has changed a lot since that time. I'm certainly still flawed in many ways, but I am a completely different person and carry a very different life than the one that I used to. This was a very personal experience, as you can probably imagine, and I've been trying to get this off my chest for a while now. Sort of give my testimony, I guess. Obviously, you can take it or leave it. It's the same for me. I mean, it's out now, so that's that. But still, my advice would be, don't go anywhere near drugs, especially LSD and hard stuff. And also, be aware that there are some dark things out there. Dark things like I saw at the bar. Things that I wish that I had never seen. And may God bless you all. My uncle and his family had multiple generations grow up in the same house. It was a beautiful 3-story Queen Anne Victorian home built in the 1890s by his great-grandfather. His family owned it up until about the 70s. It has changed hands outside of the family until about the 90s, after my uncle was able to purchase it, after establishing his own successful architectural firm. Multiple people in his family from earlier generations died in that house in the early 1900s, some from natural causes, a couple from diseases, scarlet fever and typhoid. But as soon as my uncle moved in, strange things started happening. Cabinets in the kitchen would be open when nobody was home, phantom footsteps were heard, and the weirdest thing, knocks on the door in the middle of the night and no one would be there. One of these instances of knocking on the front door to no one being there, my uncle got a call the next morning from his dad saying that his great-uncle, who had lived in the house as a kid, had actually died the night before, around the same time as the knock was heard. My own experience in the house was when I was in my late teen years. My uncle's family was out of town and they asked if I could sit the dogs for them. I always looked forward to it because the house was huge and they had a massive pool in the backyard to enjoy. But I also sort of secretly dreaded it too because the house was just really damn creepy at night. Old furniture, old family pictures, old light fixtures, straight out of a haunted house movie, really. Well, one night when I was getting ready to go to bed on the second floor, the dogs suddenly perked up, which was strange to me. They all came into the same room that I was in and sat, staring out into the hallway on alert. Shortly after, I heard the sound of distinct footsteps coming down the hallway of the 3rd floor above, and then footsteps down the stairs to my floor. I was frozen in fear suddenly. The footsteps stopped about halfway down the stairs, and not another sound was heard for the rest of the night. But I didn't sleep a wink that night. The last part of this story happened a few years ago, though, after they moved out of the house to downsize. The new owner called my uncle a month after moving in. After some cordial conversation, the new owner asked my uncle, "This might be weird, but did you have anything strange happen to you in the house?" My uncle responded, "Well, yes, when we first moved in, but what exactly do you mean?" The new owner explained that he was having some work done on the 3rd floor and he hired some painters to repaint some of the walls. The new owner left the house to run a quick errand and came back to all the painters sitting outside on the front porch looking concerned. When the new owner asked what was going on, one of the painters said, "Mister, we are not going back in there. There's something on the 3rd floor and we cannot figure it out." The painter elaborated that one of his workers was by himself on the 3rd floor, and he felt a distinct touch of a hand on his shoulder. When he turned around expecting one of his painting buddies to be there, no one was there. The third thing that happened to the new owner too was that his brother came to stay the night one night. He was set up on the 3rd floor, and when the new owner woke up the next morning, he found his brother asleep on the couch on the 1st floor. He asked his brother why he had changed rooms like this, and his brother had said that, "You're not going to believe this, but when I was getting ready for bed, I was putting away some clothes, and it felt like someone touched my shoulder, but when I turned around, nobody was there." My uncle responded to those stories saying, "Oh yeah, don't worry, those are just my old family members welcoming you to the home. They'll get used to you after a while." I'm not so sure that that was reassuring for the new owner or not, but in any case, that place is probably now haunted by my own family, and that's weird to think about. I want to start this by stating that before I moved to Oregon, or this house, I did not truly believe in the paranormal. I just thought of ghost stories as like entertainment, really. But now, I am a firm believer. In 2018, I moved into Central Oregon. I moved into the attic of a house that was built around 1840. I was a broke college student, and it was a great deal on rent. The other girls who lived in the house warned me, though, that strange things happened, but I just brushed it off, really. In the beginning, it was just small things, like the second-story balcony door being wide open in the mornings, but still deadbolt locked. Chairs from the first floor appearing on the second floor. Honestly, I just thought that it was my roommates messing with each other. Then comes Thanksgiving. So I'm the only one of 12 roommates to stay home for the holiday. I woke up and the house was freezing, so I sort of padded downstairs to turn up the thermostat. As I'm pressing the buttons, I suddenly hear two women talking. I stop pressing the buttons to listen to see who's home, and I hear one say he's coming, and I sort of immediately forgot everything else that they said. I wandered around the house, though, trying to find who's home, but there was no one. It was just me. I spend the rest of the day trying to shake it off. I mean, it must have been from how exhausted I was. At night, I'm sitting on the couch in the living room with my roommate's kitten on my lap, petting her, and all of a sudden she goes sort of rigid in my lap. And I look up and I see a shadow on the window. Inky black, like it was there on the glass, and not a reflection or someone outside. I stare at it for a moment and feel it looking back at me. Then it moves across the glass and disappears. I call my only friend who was still in town, and she comes over. After this, stranger things started happening too. Like when I would go into the basement, I would always feel eyes on me. One night, my roommate sees a man in what we call the catacombs. It's a sort of weird zigzagging hallway that leads from the main basement to the basement apartment. She calls the police, but they cannot find anyone. In the attic, my bed is in a sort of triangle-shaped room, and at night it always sounds like someone's dragging their fingernails down it above my head. Things go missing in the house. All the fish in my roommate's fish tank suddenly die one night. I hear whispers all over the house, unable to pick up what they're saying or where they're coming from exactly. One day my roommates went out of a room through a window that doesn't lock, and they could not get back inside as the window was like suddenly stuck. They were trapped out there for hours until I came home and heard them yelling. The weird thing though is that I opened it easily and couldn't understand how they were stuck like that. Well, once the lease ended, we all decided to move out. I swore to never go back, but I often feel drawn to that house for some weird reason. If I'm out walking, I'll stand outside of it and I'll sort of just stare into the window of what used to be my room. Last night I was home alone, and before anyone says anything, yes, the police were contacted and investigated and all of that. So, like I said, I was home alone last night. My parents were out at an event with some friends, so I had to stay home and watch the house. Not long after they left, I drove to a Subway to just grab some food before heading home. To be honest, I'm not an easily scared person or anything like that. But I don't know, I get such an off, empty feeling when I'm home alone because I never feel like I'm quite alone, I guess. Anyway, after eating my food, I watched some TV in the living room for a bit. But then I heard sounds from upstairs. They sounded like light footsteps, kind of. I paused the TV and listened for a bit. The footsteps stopped. Not to sound too corny or full of myself, but I'm a little bit built and won't go down without a fight, so I gathered my courage to head upstairs, but of course with a knife because I'm not dumb enough to leave myself open like that. I checked the whole upstairs and no one was there. And yes, I checked all the closets, under the beds, and everywhere someone could be hiding, and there was no one. I let out a small exhale of relief because if I did end up finding someone, then I really wasn't ready for what that would have looked like. It was getting pretty late anyway, so I switched the living room TV off, locked the house up all right, and made sure nothing was unlocked, including all of the windows, and then went to my room and watched some TV there. Everything was fine too until I heard light knocking. I looked around to see where it would be coming from, but my bedroom door was open and my closet door is built in a certain way that no one could possibly fit in there since it has like shelves, not an open space. I examined the house again and still nothing. Honestly, I was getting a little bit annoyed now. I went back into my room, but then heard someone calling me. It sounded so much like my dad's voice, and I sort of knew that it was because my dad has a thick Italian accent with a deep tone, so it definitely sounded exactly like him, but it was so weird because I didn't hear my parents come home. I was about to check it out too before realizing that every time that he called my name, it sounded exactly the same, almost like his voice had been recorded or something and just played over and over again. My heart absolutely sunk when I realized what presence that I was in. I quickly shut my door, and since it doesn't have a lock, I blocked it with my unit. I called my parents and they contacted the police. Police showed up about 10 minutes later from the station not being far from my house. I checked out of my window to make sure it was actually the police before heading downstairs and opening the door. I reported everything to them, and they told me that they would patrol the area after searching my house top to bottom, and no one was found. There was no break-in in the end because nothing was stolen. No doors or windows were unlocked or broken or anything, and apparently it wasn't a person. Which leaves me thinking that it was a mimic. In fact, I know it was. I've heard plenty of stories and seen dozens of clips of mimics being caught on camera. I didn't sleep last night, even after my parents came home. I was just so on edge because I know if I left my room from fully believing that it was my dad that I probably wouldn't be here anymore. This happened about 2 to 3 months ago. So I have a backyard area behind my house. It's actually just cement driveway with bushes, trees, and such off to the sides, really. But sometimes I take my dogs out there for a quick pee if a long walk is not due. So I'm out there with one of my dogs, probably at around 11 p.m. or 12 a.m., and he's sniffing around and peeing a bit, when all of a sudden I hear it. A voice, loud as heck. Almost sounds like he has a microphone speaker or something, and it's projected directly towards me. And for the next 25 seconds, this thing is absolutely yelling something at me. I don't know what he or it said. It was for sure not in English. I don't think it was Latin, and to be perfectly honest, it didn't sound like any language that I'd ever heard. But it was for sure a language. It spoke really loud and so distinctly that it was definitely an intelligent being. Now, for the first couple of seconds, my brain was overloading thinking, what the heck? Then I immediately think to record the sound. I didn't see anything, but I remember that I felt like my phone was inside because it was almost zero battery, and The next thought that I have is this must be some sort of a prank or speakers or something. I mean, there is a building next door, but it's literally a retirement home, and in 20 years of living here, I've never heard anything, not even a TV playing from any of their windows, let alone something as loud as this. And then this happened. The voice sounded like it was coming from a 12-foot to 500-pound creature. That's how loud and strong it sounded. But nothing was there that you could see. And the moment that I thought that it must be speakers in some movie scene or something, I kid you not, the source of the sound went back and forth like the entire length of their yard. It was moving back and forth, still talking to me, just maybe 10 feet away, way closer than the building itself. I concluded then that it was not a speaker, at least not from that building. The other crazy thing is that my dog was barking like crazy from where this voice was coming from. My dog never barks at hardly anything, especially in that scenario with just us two sort of chilling outside like that. Honestly, I cannot stop thinking of what it was. I think it was alien or something of that sort. A friend that I told who believes me thinks that it was demonic, but either way, as scary as it was in that moment, I also think, wow, that was really interesting and sort of cool. After the fact, of course. The thing's voice sounded malicious though, for sure. And if real, it's probably something that could have crushed me like we can crush an insect. So that fact really does not give me any sort of peace. This happened back in August of 2014 while I was dealing with a rough transition in my life. This happened in the middle of the night, but I'm going to tell the whole story of that whole day so that you can get a better understanding as to why it's all just so crazy. As if seeing an evil entity isn't crazy enough, right? Anyway, that day in August of 2014, I had been 4 months into a recovery program healing from an addiction that I am still free of to this day. During my time at the program, I got warnings for talking during work. During the day, we worked in a warehouse that distributed donations to a big chain thrift store. During my shift that day, I got caught talking to a male resident, which was a huge no-no at this program. So because I got in trouble for the 3rd or 4th time, I unfortunately got kicked out of the program. I opened the back door and out I went. No cell phone or money. We pretty much worked for snacks at that time. I went into a liquor store and asked to use the phone, where I made plans to have my stepdad pick me up from the train station that day. I waited there for about 4 hours since I had to wait until he was done with what he had already planned, giving me plenty of time to think on my life decisions and really what I should do next. He finally arrived though, unhappy with me as expected. I sat in what would be my new room for the next couple of months feeling defeated and honestly just exhausted. It finally came time though to get some rest and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I started to dream that I was in a place that I loved as a child called Color Me Mine, but it was also a coffee shop of sorts. I sat at a table with no coffee or clay to paint, just sitting there, noticing that it was only me and a middle-aged woman who was working there. She was sweeping the floor and suddenly stopped and said, "So, Sarah, what are you going to do now that you got kicked out of treatment?" Even though this was a dream, I remember feeling shocked that she knew my name and such personal information. As I was thinking about how to answer her question, there was suddenly a deafening scream. The scream wasn't of terror though, it was of pure anger. The woman was just looking at me with no expression on her face while this scream was happening around us. It terrified me so badly, in fact, that I ended up waking up, but the weirdest thing is that I was still hearing this scream. It faded out and I was waiting for one of my parents to come to my room and ask what the heck that was about, but they never did. And just as quickly as the scream faded, I suddenly felt a presence to the left of my bed. That was when I noticed, standing there in front of the window, there was this entity. It looked like an angry, sickly, and demonic old woman. She was staring daggers at me, and her mouth was open as if she were snarling. I was definitely awake at this point, and to this day I still know that I was awake. I looked right back at her and started praying. Since I had come out of a Christian-based program, it was honestly all that I could think to do at the time. Then she slowly faded away, and as she was, her expression softened, but was still full of hatred. Then she was gone. I sat there looking around my room. I'm not sure why, but I didn't feel scared after that. I laid back down and just went back to sleep. The next morning, I was making coffee with my mum and telling her about what I had experienced. She tried to tell me that it was all just a dream, even though I thought that I was awake after sitting up from hearing that scream that I'll never forget. She was sure, though, that the whole thing was a dream, not just the part up until the scream woke me up. But I know that at that moment that I sat up, still hearing that scream, that I was wide awake. I heard that scream still happening when I sat right up before I saw that evil thing as well. It's been over 10 years now, and I have never and will never forget it. Sometimes I think that that entity was angry because I was still determined to fight and better my life or something. I felt like the anger and the hatred that it gave off was because it wanted me to give up and wanted me to suffer. But instead I chose to fight. And now I am living an amazing life. So my parents divorced when I was 7 years old. I have an older brother who was 9 at the time of the divorce, and my mum got full custody of us, and we would only see our dad every other weekend. My mum was a waitress, so she didn't have a steady income, and we struggled a lot. And because of that, we moved around a lot, because we were constantly being evicted from our homes. When I was about 10 years old, we settled down in a home in a not-so-great part of town. Despite this was the biggest and nice house that we had ever had. It was also really cheap compared to the other places that we stayed in the years prior. But there were always creepy things that happened in this house. For instance, our TV in the living room would just turn on and off by itself. One night, in fact, my brother and I were laying on the couch in our living room just trying to go to sleep. This wasn't uncommon for us, as we slept in there many nights throughout our time there. And our TV came on as we were dozing off. Angrily, I got up and unplugged the TV from the wall and sleepily crawled back into our couch. A little while later, I could hear the faint static of the TV turning back on. I got up and went to unplug the TV, forgetting that I'd already done this previously, and when I realized, I freaked out and pressed the power button on the TV to get it to turn back off. And after that, I didn't sleep much that night. A few months passed by, and I'm laying in my bed this time. I'm not really trying to sleep, I'm just kind of laying there, and it was really quiet in my room when, out of nowhere, I heard a tap on my window. It was like a tap that you'd make with the pad of your finger, not your fingernail. I jumped off my bed and ran as fast as I could to my brother's room, which was right next to mine, and I turned on his bedroom light and was hysterically trying to explain to him what had happened in my bedroom seconds prior. I was begging him to let me sleep in the room with him because I was afraid to be alone at this point. He agreed, and I got into his bed, and after a few moments of laying there, we heard the same 2 taps on his window. Well, without saying a word, we both jumped out of bed and ran into our mum's room. We were crying and telling her what had just happened, and she had been asleep and was irritated that we woke her up. She groaned and told us that we were probably just hearing things and that we needed to go back to bed. But as soon as she finished her sentence, someone tapped on her window the exact same way that they had done to my brother and I. My mum obviously shot up at this and told us that we could sleep with her that night.
Somehow, we all managed to get to sleep that night with no further disturbances, but it was creepy. Another thing that happened was during the summer when my brother and I were at school. My mum worked every day from around 8 to 3 p.m, so she would leave us at home with her boyfriend at the time. He was a nice guy, but he didn't really do much. He just stayed awake all night and slept all day long. It was early in the morning and my brother and I were playing hide-and-seek tag. This is pretty much just hide-and-seek, but when you find the person, you have to tag them before it was their turn. We made sure to be as quiet as possible, so as we didn't wake my mum's boyfriend. I was the seeker and I found my brother, but before I could tag him, he just jumped up and ran outside. I chased after him and shut the door behind me, and after a quick loop around the house, my brother went back inside. He stopped at the door and I tagged him and laughed out, "You're it." He looked at me confused and I asked, "What's wrong?" He looked at me and said, "The door's locked." I thought that he was crazy and I went to open the door and sure enough it was locked. But it wasn't locked by the knob, the deadbolt was locked. It was something that could only be done from the inside. We ran to my mum's bedroom and banged on the window trying to wake up her boyfriend. He was a heavy sleeper and actually never woke up to let us in. Hours pass and my mum comes home and lets us into the house. My mum had also told me that there were some nights that she was sleeping in bed, and she would hear my brother screaming his lungs out for her as he had just seen something terrifying. My mum would jump up and run into his room, only to realize that we were at our dad's house for the weekend. She said that this happened to her multiple times too. One night at around 3 a.m, we were all in our bedrooms just sleeping soundly, but were woken up by a loud crash in our storage room. We all slowly tiptoed out of our rooms to find all of our Christmas ornaments broken on the floor. We had been staying here for over 6 months by this point, and our storage tubs were stacked neatly in our storage room. We also didn't have a cat or any other animal that could have knocked them over. We also had carpet, not hardwood, so all of the ornaments being shattered seemed just really unusual. Well, we cleaned up the broken pieces and we just went back to bed. The last thing that happened in that house before we moved out was actually while we were on vacation. My mum had a friend who let us stay over while we were gone for a week. He didn't have a house of his own and he sort of just hopped from couch to couch, so this would only make sense for him to stay over. About halfway through the week, my mum received a text from him and it read, "I'm sorry, but I can't stay here anymore." My mum walked into another room and called him to ask what was going on. After their conversation, my mum explained to us that her friend was sitting on her bed in her bedroom with the door cracked open, and he said that he had heard a noise and looked through the crack of the door and saw a little girl looking back at him. He said that he got up to check it out thinking that he was seeing things, and he said that when he opened the door he saw the little girl running away from him. She was apparently wearing a white dress, and he said that she ran into the storage room, and he explained that she didn't look scared and more like she was laughing, and it looked almost as if she was trying to play hide and seek with him. But after that, he just packed his bag and left, and I just never saw him again after that. We moved out of that house and nothing has happened to us since then. But surprisingly enough though, we actually know the people who live in that house today. They have said that they've experienced some weird things, but they haven't really gone into detail about it. All I can say is that I'm just happy that I'm not living there anymore. My uncle had always told me about some strange things happening in my grandmother's house when he spent the night. But first, I'm going to talk about his experience and then mine. I'll try and keep this short. So, to give some backstory on how this house is so haunted, my grandmother has had 2 miscarriages, 1 boy, 1 girl, and her husband, aka my grandfather, passed around the time that this all started happening. My uncle would tell me of events of pots smashing together to wake them up in the middle of the night and seeing shadows and all sorts of stuff. But His most memorable experience was when he was making food around 10 p.m, when he asked my little cousin if she wanted any food. With the living room being right down the hall from the kitchen, he heard her reply yes. So he started making the food and asked if she wanted him to bring it over to her. Another faint yes was heard again, so he brings the plate down the hallway to the living room, only to find her dead asleep on the couch. He wakes her up asking if she had been talking to him the whole time, and she replied no. Why? Still groggy from just being woken up. This, obviously, sent shivers down his spine. Now, in my experience, my cousin and I had spent the night together at my grandmother's house to keep her company so that she wouldn't have to be alone there. But we went outside for a quick smoke and then went back in to finally get some sleep. He slept upstairs while I slept downstairs, and I turned the TV on for some background noise and passed out on the couch. It was around 2 a.m. when I was woken up to the sound of people whispering from the kitchen. Now, let me remind you that I was asleep on the couch in the living room, which is down the hall from the kitchen. So, me being the curious 17-year-old at the time that I was, I decided to see who was awake and what they were doing. The closer I got to the kitchen, the louder the whispers seemed to get too. And as I stepped into the kitchen, the whispers just stopped and I was left alone with only the sound of my breath going on. I could have swore that I heard people talking in here though, I thought to myself. I decided to look around the house a little more to make sure it wasn't coming from a different room, and after every room being empty, I just decided to brush it off and head back to the couch. I only made it halfway down the hallway though to the living room when I started hearing the whispers again. I couldn't make out any words, it just sounded kind of like a group of people talking together in a low voice. I decided to turn around one last time when again the whispers stopped and I was left in the kitchen by myself again. At this point, I was freaking out pretty bad, but decided to just sleep just to hurry up and get through the night. As I walked for the third time back to the living room, I started hearing the whispers again coming from behind me. I didn't even look back this time though, and decided to just try my best to ignore it by turning up the volume on the TV. And after a little while, I ended up falling asleep till the next morning. When I woke up, I told everyone about what had happened, and to be honest, no one was surprised. My grandmother's house is pretty notorious for events such as this, and to this day, I still wonder where the whispers were coming from. I don't know what happened that night, but I can't help but think that it was spirits or something. When I was around 11, I had awful nightmares. Reoccurring nightmares, in fact, about a terrifying character, and they would always start the same. I would be doing something that brought me intense joy, though I can't really remember those parts, and at the height of that feeling, something would happen. Something out of a slasher film. I was absolutely terrified of anything bloody or insidious as a child. I remember my brother and sister actually sat me down to try and watch an episode of Family Guy to normalize that humor for me, but it was an episode where Peter and the chicken fought, and it was extremely bloody and violent, and I just lost my shit. I say this so that you know that I got disturbed very easily back then. But back to the dream for now. So, after something extremely satisfying would begin to conclude, a loud bass hum would fill the air and everyone around me would become instilled with what I can only describe as a primal fear. The looks on their faces would make me fall down and sob, and I would cover my eyes and I'd hear a slaughterhouse around me. There would be spilling of blood and the sharp pain from head-splitting shrieks and cries, and it was just honestly so fucked. And after a short moment of listening to my friends and family get murdered, the bass hum would stop and I'd hear someone run around quietly snickering to itself. It was as if a child was running around playing hide-and-go-seek or something. And then I'd hear complete silence as their feet would slowly form to the carpet or whatever surface it was. This dream usually took place in many different places, as they walked towards my backside. They would always stop at least 3 feet behind me, but I don't know why, and after some haunting silence, they'd speak, but it was always a different line, and here's a couple that I remember. There was, "I'm sorry, yeah, we've all heard it. I love my name, but let's just say it's Rob. Sorry, I'm busy." And this one, which the voice would say a lot, "So is it Sunday yet?" He would say something along with that sometimes, but I don't really remember now. His voice sounded like an older guy, deepening his voice, but also talking in a kind of kiddish tone, or just being a little goofy. It wasn't too deep, and it was also a little scratchy, and after that I'd wake up around 2 or 4 in the morning, unless I stayed up all night, which I'd wake up to be pretty late. So this all happened for a while, probably around 2 or 3 months, but when you're dealing with that stuff, it usually just feels longer, and it was also a long time ago, so it was probably shorter than that, but I'm not too sure. It didn't stop abruptly, though. I just had dreams less and less, and it really fucked me up as a kid, and it kind of changed me. It didn't turn me into a different person or anything. I just got much more serious and paranoid after that, which eventually went away. And now, I come to my actual experience. So, this was around 2 years ago, I think. I was living with my mum in an apartment, and I just went to the movies with 3 of my friends. We didn't really enjoy the movie or anything, and left early to head to my place, and we arrived, and all of us kind of slumped onto the furniture in the bedroom because we had walked back. So, as we sat down and I turned the TV on for my friends, I heard faint talking in the back, but my mum was home, so I didn't think much about it. We put on a Paranormal Activity show because we actually enjoyed that movie, but really we just sat and talked around and joked mostly. It was honestly a great night, and I had liked a girl that was there who was a friend of mine, and we were really hitting it off all night, but in the middle of us joking about the movie, I heard my mum call me. I hushed my friends and paused the movie and yelled, "What, Ma?" There was no answer, so I yelled louder, "Ma, what?" There was no answer again, so I got up and went to the entrance of the hallway, intent on going to my mother's room to express my annoyance for having to get up and see her, but I stopped at the hallway because I heard a weird guttural sound from the back. The sound also echoed, so I knew it was from the bathroom. I yelled, "Mum, are you in the bathroom?" and my friends laughed at this. And then I recognized the voice. And then I remembered my mum was in Chico for the night, and I stopped, and I'm sure I had that same look as the ones I remembered in my dreams. My friends thought that I was just fucking around, like I just saw my mum come out of the shower or something. But then the voice spoke loud enough for them to hear, and I'll never forget what it said. It was kind of a jumbled mess, but the voice said, "Yeah, tonight I'll pick you up. Then I'll rip you in half. But how? How? Rob will know. But no. How? Forget." During that whole dialogue, I told my friends that we need to leave now, and I rushed outside as they looked dumbfounded and confused. That last word was the last thing that I heard as I slammed the door too, and I'm sure it would have continued. I ran to the street and called my mum, and she then told me to call the police, so I did. They showed up and did their usual thing and then just left, and obviously there wasn't anything in the house. They told us that it was late, but that doesn't mean it wasn't our neighbours, and I wanted to believe that too, but I swear that it sounded exactly what I heard when I was a kid. And I swear that it was definitely in my bathroom. Well, after that, my friends told me that it was fine, and they all went home, hiding how scared that they were, probably trying to make me feel better or something. I knew too, because my best friend was supposed to stay over, but all of a sudden, his mum needed him to do stuff at 12 at night. I began to have a dream that night again, and I forced myself awake just as I heard that bass hum. I ran for the lights, and I didn't sleep much for the next week and a half. But I haven't had that dream since. I know I might sound crazy, but I know that I heard that thing in my house, and I know for sure that my friends heard it too. So, I'll get started with a little bit about myself. I'm 19 years old and currently live in the UK. Previously, I was an extreme skeptic of all things supernatural. Ghosts and demons and all those stories just never fazed me, as I can normally convince myself of a rational explanation. However, lately I've had strange experiences that seem to have changed the way that I think. Not about ghosts or that sort of stuff, but about aliens. You see, I've always had an underlying fear of grey aliens. Not an extreme phobia or anything, such as arachnophobia, where the sufferers can't even look or hear about their feared creatures. In fact, I have an extreme interest in the concept of aliens and wish to believe that they're real and we're not alone in the universe. However, something about the idea of grey aliens just presents me with an intense feeling of dread and despair when I think about them in my own life. I can't sleep being able to see outside or facing anything with a corner that I cannot see around. I also find it difficult to sleep without any kind of sound to distract myself with and help me doze off without much thought. Now, approximately 3 months ago, I encountered my first ever night terror. These were common for my dad, who experienced them for years. His night terrors, however, were generally funny, him seeing weird things like my nan's eyes glowing neon that woke him up screaming. My only night terror to date was very different. I laid in bed with my girlfriend and fell asleep, and I remember each part of the dream like it was real. I awoke in the same clothes, with the same sleeping position, with my curtains in the same position and everything. The curtains were slightly open, so I did struggle to sleep, but I didn't want to make a fuss and look like an idiot in front of her or anything. A boyfriend who can't sleep because he's scared of the tiniest side of the outside? Get a grip, man. The only thing that happened in the dream, though, was that I could see a face, a dead center of the gap in the window. It didn't move and it didn't blink, it just sort of floated there looking at me. Whatever it was, though, it wasn't human. Its face was long, almost shaped like a slice of pizza or something, rounded at the top and thin down to the point at the bottom. It may have been that it was blocked by the curtains too, but this was all I could see, and as much as I wanted to see, to be honest. Its eyes were large, too large, black as night, no pupils, no movement, just there, but I could tell that it was looking at me too. I felt the same sense of dread that I do with the alien fear that I have, feelings of my heart sinking and an inability to move, and in fear of what might be waiting around each corner. I awoke hyperventilating, in fact the same hyperventilating I encountered at the end of my dream. My girlfriend woke me up in fear of what was going on with me, but I just shrugged it off as a nightmare. Ever since, though, strange things have been occurring in the house. My family had reported strange things happening before, but my lack of experience has led me to believe them to be explainable, weird things that just happened for a reason or something, such as a lack of balance or wind from outside, the usual. My mother claimed that she had seen a man look at her through the doorway of our living room, but disappear when she looked directly at the area. Her and my brother's girlfriend also experienced the same dream on the same night, talking to twin girls by each of their respective bedsides. My brother and sister claimed to see shadows run past doorways, and my father claimed curtains moved on their own with no windows open. I never truly believed these claims, until my experiences started. Since that night terror, weird things have been happening around the home which, to be honest, really terrify me. Items have flown from sides which we could not see but were impossible to fall. Entire books, which weighed upwards of 1 kilogram approximately, fell to the floor despite being completely on the side, with no parts over the edge. Loud bangs were heard at night from our downstairs that scared our animals and sounded like gunshots, but nothing moved upon investigation. As I live in the UK, it's also extremely difficult to get a hold of firearms, and nobody, as far as I know in our local area, has even held a rifle, let alone shot one in their house. Our cat continues to look at things too, which just aren't there, following them around rooms with their eyes, which dilate to their maximum level, looking at nothing. Knocking has been heard at our back door too, which is made entirely of glass, mind you, meaning that we would see anyone who would do it. Our technology constantly bugs out too, with lights flickering constantly, light bulbs lasting no longer than a few weeks at most, and Wi-Fi in our home being ineffective despite constant upgrades and extenders. It almost feels as if something is blocking electrical signals, especially in my room, as I plugged a cable straight into the router that connects to my Xbox 2 floors up, which one night was just pulled out from underneath my door, despite being so tightly wrapped anywhere besides just outside my room that pulling on it from anywhere other than there would conclude with failure. The weird experience, though, was straight after we heard the knocking on the back door. I retreated lazily up to my room to just play video games, and the top landing light was broken again, meaning that it was not on, and no other upstairs room lights were turned on, with my door being shut, and suddenly a bright blue flash occurred as if it originated from my room, almost as if someone had just used an extremely powerful torch that filled the entire floor for a second, despite my door being completely closed. I have no idea what these things mean, and I try to explain away, but I feel as though each event just keeps drawing me back to that one night terror with that face that scared me to death. Even as I write, I can feel that dread engulf me. I'm unable to stay calm and feeling as though around every corner something just continues to peer around and watch my every moment. I just want to know what's wrong, to be honest. If it is psychological, then what can I do to fix it? I don't know if it is aliens, like I believe it might be, but that dread that I feel with the face, these events, and my previous feelings about aliens are one and the same, and I want to know what I can do to just make it stop. At the time this story took place, I was about 13 years old. My parents split when I was pretty young, and my mum had to provide for my sister and myself, and my mum is really honest and thorough with her work, so she found it rewarding to clean offices and houses for money. My sister and I often went with her to clean up too, and by the time that this story took place, we were pretty used to it. So, my mum had 3 buildings she cleaned regularly, which we came up with nicknames for. There was the main building, the red building, and the brick building. Brilliant, I know. But we had to clean all 3 buildings that night, so we started with the red building. This, out of all the places that I've ever been to help my mum, was my least favourite. I hated going there. It looked normal from the outside, mind you, but every time I took a step inside, I felt depressed and uneasy. It was like all the purpose of life had just been sucked out of the world, and I just wanted to fall asleep. At this time, it had been a while since we had visited the red building, and there was this bathroom in the surveillance room that needed a clean badly. The surveillance room was usually locked, and I actually had never been in this room. The first thing my sister and I noticed was the wall of monitors, each displaying the feed of the security cameras that were everywhere in the building. We had some fun playing around with the monitors, making one of us stay in the surveillance room while the others make faces and stuff in the camera in another room. I would like to mention too that my sister and I have a close relationship, and we've always just been weird. We both laugh at jokes and stupid stuff, and we also like to scare each other. Anyway, our mum got onto us about goofing around and assigned us both some jobs. After about an hour and a half of scrubbing and vacuuming and whatnot, we were almost done, and my mum was in the break room kitchen and my sister was hovering somewhere nearby. I was extremely tired by this point, and I just wanted to lie down or do anything except work. I was watching my mum prepare the water to mop the kitchen with when she asked me if I would like to mop or go and turn off the lights upstairs. I was so exhausted that I was only thinking about not doing work, so I decided to turn off the lights and I headed up the narrow stairs into the kitchen. The layout of the upstairs was odd since it used to be an apartment building. There are 2 sets of staircases on opposite sides of the building, and I went up the ones in the kitchen. The other set was in the entryway of the front door. At the top of those stairs there was this hallway too that I always like to avoid. So I started turning off lights one by one, and I was thinking about how we still had 2 other buildings to clean and I needed to pull myself together. I blocked out my surroundings and was effortlessly flipping switches. But the second that I walked into the hallway that I tried to avoid, I became a little more aware of what I was doing. Ever since I was little, I've been afraid of the dark, so I started turning off the lights in the offices that surrounded the hallway. I got carried away in shutting off the lights, to which, when I reached the point to turn off the hallway light, I jumped from a small step in an office doorway to the center of the hall. The hallway ceiling was really high, so the light switch was actually just a string that dangled from it. I wrapped my hand around the string and pulled, and as soon as the room went dark, I was filled with dread. And then I heard a very soft grunt coming from behind me. It sounded like when a person dies naturally and their body relaxes or something, so all the air in their lungs is just released. As soon as I heard it, my whole body stiffened with fear too, and adrenaline, and I started to sweat. It felt like if I turned around, I was going to die or something. Like whatever I saw, if I looked behind me, would consume me whole. I felt so powerless and terrified, and I didn't know what to think, and just that if I stayed there any longer, I was going to get hurt. My body took over my mind through adrenaline, and I ran down the stairs faster than I knew I could. I ran directly into the surveillance room, hoping that my sister was in there, and I called out her name. No response. I was so desperate and terrified that I ran over to the monitors and started scanning for anyone near me that I could run to. The first movement I saw was in the screen that showed the stairs that I had just run down, and I saw my sister walking down them with her coat and Boba Fett hat on with a mop in her hand. I took a deep breath and lied down on the couch that was in the surveillance room, and I was so relieved that it was my sister. I knew that she had just scared me and that she always did that, and it made perfect sense. I had thought that she mopped the kitchen and then followed me up the stairs and took the opportunity to scare me. After I calmed down, I walked into the kitchen where I saw my mum and my sister talking. I leaned on the island counter and told my sister that she scared me, and she looks at me and asks, "What?" I repeated myself, and she asks when she scared me. I told her that she came up behind me upstairs when I was turning off the lights, and I laughed and asked if I looked dumb running down the stairs. Both my mum and my sister weren't laughing though, but they were staring at me with confused faces, so I asked them what. My sister began to say that she was downstairs talking to her mum ever since I walked up to turn the lights off. I told her that I knew that she was lying because I saw her on the cameras walking down the stairs. I described that I saw her holding a mop and that she was wearing both her hat and coat. And then my mum chimes in that my sister wasn't lying and that they really were talking. I began to think at this point that my mum was in the joke too, so I told my sister to follow me to the surveillance room, and I pointed to the exact monitor I saw her walking down the stairs on. And that was when she told me that she took off her coat the second we walked into the building and hadn't put it back on since. She also only walked down those stairs once with the mop, but that was way earlier. I was confused and a little bit scared, and when we packed up our things and we got into the car, my sister told me what doppelgangers are. I never knew what they were before this, and I had never heard a story about them either, which only makes it more terrifying for me, to be honest. I thought of every way that I could rationalize this, but nothing just ever made sense. First, I thought maybe the footage wasn't live, but then remembered how my sister and I were playing with the cameras. Maybe I was just paranoid about the dark, but I do know for sure what I felt was real. I still don't fully understand what happened, and I wonder what would have happened if I had turned around instead of running. Anyway, I know some people are bound not to believe me, but I'm thankful for the people that don't think I'm crazy because they've experienced the same exact thing. My father has had his fair share of strange and paranormal encounters in his lifetime so far. However, one experience that really stuck to him took place in 1982 when he was 13 and still living in the Philippines. He was attending school at Christ the King Missionary Seminary in Quezon City, a Roman Catholic institution that prepared students for priesthood. Obviously, my father never followed through with the program, thank goodness, as he admitted that he was never really serious about becoming a priest and that joining the seminary was really just a means for him to live more independently. And apparently, this story is partly responsible for changing his mind. So, my father and his friends, John, Rob, Richard, and Nick, all attended the seminary, but none of whom actually became priests either. Go figure. Everything stemmed from when Nick got sick with the flu one time. He was quarantined in the seminary infirmary so as to prevent other students from getting sick, as was standard procedure. And no one thought anything of it, to be honest. It was when he was released 2 days later, though, that things started getting weird. My dad explained that Nick came back acting abnormally reserved and just quiet. Instead of laughing and joking around in the mass hall, he would just stay silent, sometimes with his head down and sometimes just staring blankly at the window, never looking at or talking to anyone. One day, though, during lunch, my dad and the rest of the group noticed tears running down Nick's face as he just quietly cried at the table, head still down and still refusing to talk to anyone. Concerned, my dad and his friends notified one of the seminary regents, sort of like a cross between a youth leader and an RA, and Nick was summoned into the regent's office. The group approached the regent after the fact, asking what was up with Nick and if he was okay. The regent explained that after asking Nick what was wrong and if he was okay, Nick finally admitted that there's this man who's following me and I didn't want to say anything because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Nick was then asked to describe the man who was following him, and he explained that the man was wearing a pair of jeans but was shirtless and he apparently had no face. According to the regent, after Nick described what the man looked like, he completely snapped, panicking and sobbing, yelling things at the regent like, "I really don't want to see him anymore. Please, I don't want to see him. Just help me. Please help me." The regent, along with the prefect, who was sort of like a school principal, the priest, who were also present in the office, had to hold Nick down as he was just completely distraught. After praying for a bit, they were able to calm Nick down and assured him that they'd always be available if he ever needed anything, before dismissing him from their office. Although disturbed by the incident, my father initially thought that maybe excessive stress might have been the cause of his friend's outburst or something. However, it should also be noted that the possibility of ghosts and demons and other malicious entities were no surprise to the seminarians, as new students were always initially warned that because the seminary was a house of reformation and that students were preparing themselves to carry out God's work, resistance coming from opposing entities who wanted to drive out students were common and to be expected. Either way, my dad and the rest of the group gave Nick his space for the next couple of days, assuming that he just wanted to be alone for a while until he felt more like himself. That is, until the night things came to a head. Now, everyone was in their dorm rooms, and Nick and my father and their friend Richard had their beds situated right next to each other. Everyone was setting up their mosquito nets and getting ready to sleep when a sudden shout from Nick just startled everyone. He began yelling, "Get away from me." According to my father, his outcry was followed by 2 aggressive swings as Nick tried to fight off some unseen assailant. And what happened next, my father still truly doesn't know what to believe. He apparently watched as Nick's head just whipped back as if he was struck by a blow to the jaw. And then his whole body was forcefully thrown into the air. My father, although somewhat religious, is still a fairly skeptical guy, and he claims that the way that Nick's body was shoved back just seemed genuine, with no bend to his knees to justify him simply just jumping back like that. If it was all just in his head, then my dad stated that Nick was a really good actor. But the night only got stranger from there. As soon as Nick was struck by this unseen force, he got knocked unconscious and the regent was called immediately, followed by the prefect and priest. Together they carried Nick into the regent's office. As disturbed and afraid as my father was, he, John and Rob ended up trailing behind them, partly out of concern but mainly out of plain stupid curiosity. The doors of the regent's office were shut behind the group and my father was immediately regretting being so nosy. The room was incredibly tense and thick with fear. It was evident on even the priest's face that he was wary and reluctant of having to deal with Nick and a possible demon. The regent, prefect, and priest all figured that my dad and the group would stick around to help with praying over him and help him regain consciousness, and they quickly do as instructed and start praying the rosary. As if the night wasn't already creepy enough, halfway through praying the Hail Mary, my father's friend John just starts to talk complete gibberish, and what my father could only explain as speaking in tongues. After this nonsensical outburst, John promptly collapses, and luckily the priest was quick enough to catch him and set him on the floor before he hit his head on anything. At this point, my father is just confused and terrified as all hell, wishing that he'd never decided to join the damn seminary in the first place, and that he could just be safe at home instead, watching episodes of Three's Company with his dad. Of course, there wasn't much else that they could do at that moment, other than continue to pray and hope things got better. John regained consciousness shortly after, almost as if nothing had happened, although noticeably confused. My father actually asked him what the hell caused him to talk like he did, to which John replied with a repeated, "I don't know." They finished praying after a while, and Nick was still unconscious. Deciding that the group had done all that they could do to help, the regent, the prefect, and the priest all agreed that the boys should go back to their dorms and get some sleep, telling them that Nick would stay in the office with them overnight, presumably to continue watch and pray over him and perhaps call medical authorities. The group obeyed and returned to their dorm, rejoining the rest of the students who were just as unnerved and unable to sleep from the night's turn of events. My dad's friend, Reggie, whose bed was right next to his, meekly asked him if they could share a bed, as he was too afraid to be alone, to which my father agreed. My dad remembers that he and Reggie were shaking so violently from fear that he could hear the bed frame shake as well, something that he laughs about now, despite being so unsettled at the time. The next morning, Nick's parents picked him up from the seminary for a 2-week leave, and apparently when he came back the 2 weeks later, Nick was just back to his normal self, and no one ever brought it up after that. A while after these events, long after my father and his friends had left the seminary, Nick had a falling out with a group over personal issues, and so my dad is just no longer in contact with them. But John is still a close family friend though, and my father will sometimes bring this story back up with him, and he's considered extreme anxiety or paranoia and everything as possible explanations for what happened at the seminary. However, those are all just theories, and they really don't fit all that well. It remains something that my father just still cannot fully explain. I mean, the fact that he had a flu and everything could explain why maybe he was having some sort of hallucination. But the way my father describes that night when he was like punched and pushed and thrown into the air or whatever it was, he still wonders over that. I'm from Canada, Alberta, and that's all I can really say is I have to keep things as private as possible. I've worked at this nursing home for about 1.5 years as a cleaner and a food server now. I usually work the late cleaning shifts, and as of late I've had weird things happen. Things just keep progressing the longer I work here too. And things are especially strange in one area of the building particularly. I can assure you that this is all 100% true as well. I used to be skeptical about things like this until I started working here. So, here's when it all started. I went in to do my late shift as any other day, but please note that I'm also pregnant in these stories. So late shifts include cleaning the dining rooms and the kitchens and doing all the laundry from that day. But mind you, this is a really big old facility and I'm working alone on late shifts. There's 2 dining rooms that can sit 70 people at least, and 1 kitchen and 1 laundry room that have those big industrial washers and dryers. So there is always lots of cleaning to be done. I was doing my usual routine, sweeping the floors of the first dining room before mopping it, when I suddenly smelled a really bad odor, and it made me sick to my stomach. I thought that maybe the cooks had left some rotten meat in the trash can, but to my surprise, all the garbages were cleaned out. I went back down to the dining room, though, to figure out where the smell was coming from, and I followed the smell down past the kitchens and into the hallway where the rooms are. This was the east wing of the building, and there's only 5 residents living in this area of the building, and it includes our laundry room area as well. This wing is the older wing that has yet to be renovated, so a lot of the rooms are empty. I followed the smell down the hall, all the way to the empty room at the end of the hallway, and I knew nobody lived in there. I knew all my residents well and where they all lived. This room is room 218, and you could just smell the foul odor emanating from the door. I assumed that the cleaning ladies from the morning had left a trash bag full of rotten food in there or something. They often leave things behind while cleaning, so no harm done. I thought I'll just throw it out myself. But because of fire safety policies of our facility, I had a master key that unlocked all the rooms. I unlocked the door and opened to the room, and the smell just hit me and almost made me puke right there. Covering my nose, I proceeded to walk into the room as there was an immediate noticeable change in temperature. It was like the AC had been running in this room all day, and I just had a terrible uneasy feeling the whole time that I was in there, and I immediately wanted to leave. I searched the room quickly for anything that could be making the horrible smell, and I was confused when all there was an empty closet and bathroom. I just thought that maybe it could be a dead animal stuck in the wall and I'd have to leave a note to my manager. I unlocked the door and started down the hall, and then suddenly I heard a really loud knock against the door. A chill ran through my whole body as I turned around to face the door, and I was sure nobody was in there as I'd just been in there. And then I heard it again, but this time much louder, twice as hard on the door in fact, and I felt pale. Being the pregnant and cowardly girl that I was, I just began to run down the hall as fast as I could manage. I didn't know what or who or what the hell was going on with that room, but I felt that I had a reason to be afraid. I got back to the kitchen fast and dialed 911 on the phone, as I was sure that someone had broken in and was messing with me. I told the operator that it was a possible break-in, and they told me that there was a policeman on patrol 2 minutes away, and I sighed at my luck and waited at the front doors. When the policeman finally showed up, I explained everything as I showed him what room. He went down the hall and cleared the room, and he told me that nobody was found, and the room had still been locked. Even the windows were untouched, and he said that there was no smell. I was startled by this because only a few minutes ago, I could have sworn that I smelt rotting meat and heard the knocks. I ruled it out as my tiredness and my pregnancy brain at the time, and he took a report and went on his way. Mind you, I was still very uneasy as I finished up my shift, but this was the first time I've experienced anything paranormal. The second time, again, I was working the late shift one night, and I was in the laundry room just finishing up the last bit of my shift. I was folding the laundry and was just caught in my own thoughts. Now, this room has really large windows. Being late and dark, you can see your reflections in the surrounding room through the dark windows too. I looked down at the laundry and looked back up, and my heart stopped as I saw an old man with black dark eyes just staring back at me, smiling. I screamed and looked behind me, thinking that it was a resident messing with me, and to my horror, there was nobody there. I felt really uneasy as I looked around, and I looked out in the hall, but there was nobody there either. I said hello, but there was no answer, and after that, I felt sick. I finished what laundry I had left and locked up the laundry room, and as I was locking the door, I could see an elderly man standing at the end of the hallway in my peripheral. I turned to look, and it was the man who was just behind me a few minutes ago. He was smiling, eyes grey and black. I take note that he definitely isn't familiar, and he's a tall, heavier man wearing jeans and a white t-shirt that's tucked in. He was a bald man and clearly elderly, and he was just standing there, smiling at me. The smile sent shivers down my spine too, and I thought maybe that we got a new resident and my manager just forgot to mention it or something, and so I called out. Hello, sir? Do you need anything? I'm Belle, and I'm working on the night shift. It's nice to meet you. I managed under my intense anxiety. But he just stood there, smiling. If you need anything, feel free to call the staff phone, okay? I'll be over in no time. I was so very uneasy and just wanted to go back to the staff room, and he just stood there continuing to grin. I smiled back and waved nervously, and I said, have a good night, sir, and feel free to call me if you need anything, okay? I walked away in a hurry, and just as I got back to the staff room, the phone started blaring. I looked at the caller ID, and it's coming from 218. I felt really uneasy, but it must have been just a new resident or something, so perhaps he was just too shy to talk to me. I didn't know. But I hesitated and finally answered. Hello, sir? How can I help you tonight? There was a deep, crisp growl from the other end of the phone, and it didn't sound at all human. It scared the shit out of me. And then the phone just went to static. Hello? Hello? I said, nervously. The phone went to dial tone, and I sat there for I don't know how long, and my heart was pounding in my throat. Due to safety protocols, I had to go check on the resident too. As much as my instincts told me to avoid him, I walked nervously down the east wing, my heart pounding in my ears. I came to room 218 and I knocked on the door and asked if the person was okay. But there was no answer. So I knocked again and still no answer. And I became concerned. What if my resident was attacked by something? That growl, it definitely wasn't human. But I was also pregnant and didn't want to storm in and be attacked by God knows what. So I turned around to get the phone from the staff room, and then I heard the door creak open very slowly behind me. I walked over to the door slowly, and before pushing it open, I said, hello? Sir, are you alright in there? I pushed the door open at this point. I was expecting something or someone to jump out at me, but when I opened the door, there was nothing. Nobody in the room and no belongings that would imply someone lived there. It was just completely empty, but I had a terrible feeling like I was just being watched, and I searched the room and that smell of rotten meat filled my nose again. And then I heard the most terrifying laugh, and it burst through my ears like knives. It was such a deep and low and just cackling laugh, and I literally shit myself as I ran out of the room so fast. I didn't even bother to shut the door, and as I was running, I was thinking to myself, am I going crazy? I could have sworn that there was no one in there. I mean, I didn't see anyone. What the hell's going on? That night, I finished my shift quickly, and I just walked the fuck out of there early. I didn't give a shit about spending one more minute there. But sadly, this is not where it ends. Due to being a soon-to-be single mum and pregnant, I had no other option but to stay here until I was on maternity leave, as my husband died a few months ago due to a drunk driver hitting him. He was supposed to come home that night to cook a meal and my positive pregnancy test and all that, and he didn't even get to know that he was going to be a dad. Anyway, I was stuck there for a while, but that's where I'm going to leave it off for now. If you guys would like to hear more of my experiences, then please be sure to leave a comment below, as I definitely have more than a few to share. Thanks for listening. So I live in the UK and am a 21-year-old female. I run a B&B and am pretty used to having to make weirdos feel welcome. However, they are mostly harmless at the end of the day. But last week's experiences was by far the worst and most terrifying. It all started on the Monday night of last week. It was the end of summer break, so a lot of tourists were travelling around my area, so it was good business for the B&B. Staying in one of the 7 rooms, I had a foreign couple and their baby. In another room, 2 girls who had travelled from Australia, and in the attic room, I had a lone man who, to be honest, I got bad vibes from at the very beginning of meeting him. He was tall and had long greasy hair and dirty unkempt fingernails, and altogether he just looked very dishevelled. He didn't really talk too much either. He just asked what room he would be staying in and walked in there and shut the door behind him. Still, nothing too out of the ordinary in my opinion. Unfortunately though, it didn't stop there. Now, I spend most of my time in my personal hobby room. I mostly watch TV for a lot of the days and then just go upstairs to my bedroom to go to sleep. I climbed the tall staircase and went to my room, and I checked my alarm clock, and it was only 9:30 PM, so I thought I might just lie down and watch some videos on my computer. Halfway through watching my favourite movie, I was interrupted by a loud knocking on my door. It wasn't an average knock though, it was really aggressive. I looked through the peephole in the door and was surprised to see that it was the strange man who was staying in the attic bedroom. I opened the door and he started talking straight at me, not letting me get a word in, telling me that the water pipe in his room had burst and that there was water spurting everywhere and that he wanted me to fix it. I obviously apologized to him and, without questioning anything, let him lead me to his attic room. But the first red flag was the fact that he shut the door and locked it behind him. The next thing was that there was no water anywhere. And then I remembered that there were not actually any pipes anywhere in the attic. I don't know how I forgot, but I guess I was more worried about the guy asking for a refund than actually questioning whether he was being legitimate about the whole pipe burst thing. But now, I was stuck, and the only other people who were staying at the B&B were 2 floors below me, so they would never be able to hear me scream. I'm also a woman, so I had no chance of being able to fight off this guy. I looked at him and he shot me a yellow grin, and he lurched for me, but I leaped out of the way. I noticed something sticking out of his pocket jacket, and it was a knife handle. He pretty much ripped it out of his pocket and started swiping at the air with it. I bolted out of there and heard him running at top speed behind me until we got to the 2nd floor, where I heard him running back up to his room. I locked myself in my room and called the police immediately. I also called the other guests on their landlines and told them to lock their doors and stay in their rooms. When the police arrived, they found the man hiding in the wardrobe in his room. I guess that he freaked out when he heard the sirens and just hid in there. Apparently, he only had one backpack, and it contained a toothbrush, duct tape, a Stanley knife, a Phillips head screwdriver, and some intimate things which I can't even write down, but I'm sure you can guess what I'm talking about. They never found out for sure what he had planned on doing to me, but from the contents of his bag, we all had a pretty good idea. They took him away in cuffs, and thankfully, I've never seen the guy again. I plan on moving away at some point soon because I just don't really feel comfortable with him knowing where I live. Also, every day I just see that grin that he gave me as he was taken away and his wild eyes. This is definitely the most scary experience that I've ever had. So this is a story that my mum told me from her childhood. I've put it in my own words, but have not changed any of the details of the events. So here it is. Memories are odd, every time that you reflect on one, you skew it just a bit, and after years and years, your memories become a disfigured version of what actually happened. It's kind of like that grade school game, telephone, where you whisper something to the person next to you, and then they whisper what they think you said to the person next to them, and so on, and by the time it gets back to you, the phrase being passed around is nothing like the original phrase. I've often wondered how different my childhood was compared to how I remember it. How many details I've changed, how many things I recall that may not have actually happened at all. I fully accept that not everything is as I think it was, and I'm fine with that. One memory, though, haunts me in vivid and precise brushstrokes. Funny how the ones you'd rather forget seem to be the ones that just refuse to relinquish their clarity. The memory I'm referring to takes place in October of 1986, just outside of Dallas, Texas. I still remember the dress I was wearing. It was yellow with white polka dots, long sleeves, and went all the way past my ankles as per my parents' religious requirements. I hated that dress, but at 11, my parents didn't yet think that I was capable of choosing appropriate attire for myself. I hated it because it was rather hard to move in, and my mum had made it herself, and it was pretty tight from mid-thigh down. Anyway, my sister, who was a bit older than me, had just gotten a driver's license, and she wanted to take the car out. My mum said that she could as long as she took me with her. She agreed, grabbed the keys, and off we went. We left around 6-ish, and it was already getting dark, but my sister, who was a little uncomfortable behind the wheel, wanted to drive in the evening so that she would have less traffic to deal with. Well, we also stuck to the side streets and back roads until we worked our way to a stretch of relatively desolate highway. So we'd been driving around just listening to the radio and embracing our first true taste of freedom for about an hour. We were just circling back and forth along some 10 or so miles of the USHW 80 between Mesquite and Forney, Texas, just outside of Dallas. It's a little busier there now, but back then it was just a 10-mile stretch of trees and railroad tracks. It was there that we heard the engine clunk, and my sister's novice driving skills became apparent as the car sputtered a few hundred yards before dying and rolling to a stop. We'd run out of gas, and the closest gas station was a few miles back. This was before cell phones, so the only thing that we could do was grab the gas can from the trunk and walk back to the station. Remember that poorly constructed polka dot dress? Well, this is where that comes into play. After about 100 yards, it was obvious that it would be more trouble than it was worth for me to hobble behind my sister for several miles, so she handed me the keys and told me to just wait in the car. I got back in the car and locked all the doors and just watched the rear window until my sister was out of view. I was a very meek and timid and easily frightened little girl at the time, and it didn't take long for the dark to infiltrate my psyche. But there were no street lights, and I hadn't seen another car since my sister left. But the only light was from the moon, which was full enough that I could see the thick tree line about 30 yards off the road. After what seemed like an eternity alone in the dark, my fear and nerves began to really fray. It was completely silent, and not even the crickets were chirping. I became acutely aware of just how unnervingly silent it was. I wanted it to end, but at the same time, was afraid of what might end it. So I just sat petrified, almost anticipating to hear the boogeyman's whispers in the wind at just any moment. All I could think to do was to try and fall asleep, and hopefully by the time that I woke up, my sister would be back. I leaned the seat back and closed my eyes and tried my best to just block the boogeyman from my mind. Another 15 minutes or so passed while I turned this way and that way, just trying to find a halfway comfortable position. It was in the midst of the fidgeting that an eerie feeling just ran down my spine. A feeling that I just wasn't alone, and it was a feeling of unshakable dread that I was being watched. I was lying on my side facing the steering wheel, looking downward at the floorboard, my back to the passenger window, my eyes pressed tightly shut, and I was afraid to open them, afraid of what I couldn't see, of what I might, in fact. I took a deep breath and counted to 3 and opened my eyes, and there was nothing there. I took another deep breath and quickly shifted my gaze to the driver's side window, and I exhaled, seeing nothing there either. You're okay, I told myself. I sat there wide-eyed, just staring straight ahead, focusing on the steering wheel for another 10 minutes or so. And that's when all at once and all of a sudden, I felt stricken with a paralyzing sense of terror, and the voice in my head just started repeating, "Don't turn around." My heart began racing faster in my chest, and my body stiffened and my limbs felt so heavy as an inner panic had started to take hold. I tried telling myself that it was all just in my head and there was nothing outside of my window, that I was just working myself up. But to my utter horror, however, a shadow shifted off the driver's side seat and then filled it back up again, followed by 3 taps on the glass behind me. That shadow had been covering that seat since before I had even opened my eyes, as I had hardly blinked since opening them. That means that whoever or whatever was outside the car had just been standing there, watching me. As this terrifying thought ran through my head, there were 3 more taps, louder this time, and I knew that I couldn't just ignore them anymore. I mustered up all the courage that I could and turned to meet the tapper. Hello? I nervously whispered as my eyes tried to focus on the figure outside the window. "Aren't you a little young to be out here all alone, little lady? Where are your parents?" His voice was deep and had an authoritative tinge to it. As he spoke, chills went down my spine. Suddenly, the air felt cold and the night felt sinister. The man was abnormally tall, the top of the window well below his chest line. His hands were extremely muscular and his fingers long and needly. As my eye tried to focus, he bent his enormous slender frame over enough to peer in the window. He was clean-shaven, revealing extremely sunken cheeks and eye sockets too. His eyes themselves were bulging outward and seemed too large for his face, and while it could have just been the night, I swear that they were completely black. "Little girl," he repeated, "I asked where your parents are." I'm with my sister, we are..." He cut me off and pulled out a flashlight shining into the car. "I can't understand you. I'm gonna have to ask you to roll down the window. It's all right, I'm a cop." The ambient light from the flashlight allowed me to see that he was in fact in an officer's uniform, and for a brief moment, relief hit me. Rolling down the window, I spoke a little louder. "I'm with my sister and we broke down. She went to get some gas. I couldn't go with her because I can't walk in this dress." A slight grin came across his face. "Ah, I see. So you're not out here all alone then?" he said, almost gleefully. Yes, sir. Just until my sister gets back." "And when will she be back then? The closest station is a few miles away. That could take a while, right?" My relief was starting to dissipate as the familiar feeling of looming dread returned. I don't know. She's been a couple of hours now, I guess." He said. "Tell you what. Why don't you come with me and we can go and get your sister? You won't have to walk. How does that sound?" It hadn't dawned on me until then, but I suddenly realized that I hadn't seen any headlights in either direction for 20 minutes by this time. I turned to look out the rear window and started to tremble as I confirmed that there was in fact no car in any direction within any eyesight. "But where's your cop car?" I almost hesitantly asked. Right over there, just through the trees." He pointed to the tree line in the distance. "Haven't you ever wanted to ride in a cop car?" I think I should just wait here for my sister to get back. She won't be much longer." "Look, it's past curfew, and if you don't get home soon, I'll have to arrest you, okay? Your parents won't like it if you get arrested now, will they?" Now, a new fear entered my 11-year-old brain. The fear that I could be arrested. But my instinct said to not get out. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, rolling up the window. "I really should wait for my sister." As the window was about an inch from closing, he stuck his fingers through trying to stop me, and I ended up smashing them between the door and the glass. He shrieked in pain, pulling his hand back. "Oh, you fucking little bitch! You smashed my fucking fingers!" "Oh, I'm sorry," I said through the now closed window, backing up in my seat as far from the door as I could. He started pulling on the door handle violently and shaking the car back and forth. "Open this fucking door, you little bitch! Do you know how long you'll go to jail for resisting arrest?" He pulled out something that looked like a nightstick and started banging on the roof of the car and the window. He smacked the window again, and a spider web of cracks erupted from where the club struck. Now, I knew that it was only a matter of time before he got in, and was afraid that he'd follow through on the promises of making things worse. I said okay through frantic sobs, not even realizing that I had started crying at this point. He suddenly got completely calm and said, "Well, all right then. Go ahead and step out of the vehicle and follow me to my car." Yes, sir." I rolled up the window and stepped out of the car. "This way," he said. Tremors ran through my body as I slowly began to follow the man. I knew that something wasn't right, and all I could think was that he was leading me into something unspeakable behind those trees. I wanted to run, but with my dress, I wouldn't make it far before he caught me, and where would I go even if I could? We were about halfway to the tree line, 40 feet away, when headlights lit up the field that we were standing in. "Come on," he snarled, grabbing my arm and pulling me along at a hastened pace. We were 10, maybe 15 feet from the trees when the shouts started. The headlights were now beaming directly on us like spotlights from heaven when several voices, all female, started yelling in our direction. They started yelling, "Get away from that man, little girl. That man's not a police officer. He's a bad man. Let her go, you demon. God is watching you. Little girl, come here to us and get away from the bad man." They just sent a barrage of shouts until the man let go of me and ran into the trees. They yelled to me to run to them as fast as I could, and so I did, as hard as I could, ripping my dress in the process. Two women in thigh-length dresses stood outside the open side doors of an old white church van. They urged me to get in, and I jumped inside into the arms of another woman and heard the door slam behind me. There were 6 ladies altogether inside the van, all older, larger women. "It's all right, sweetie. You're safe now. We won't let the bad man hurt you, okay?" One of them reassured me. I said through tears that I have to wait for my sister, and they reassured me that they'll wait here and keep the bad man away. Every so often, they would start yelling for me to not look out the window and pulled me into their chest to shield my eyes. But curiosity got the better of me, and I peered out against my better judgment, prying my eyes sideways away from the woman who was holding me. And what I saw still haunts my nightmares. It was the man, now completely nude, running down on all fours in and out of the tree line, and through the field between us too. I don't know what he was doing, but he was moving quickly and kind of in an unnatural way. Sometimes he'd come as close as a few feet from the van and just make the most disturbing guttural grunts and growls that I've ever heard. The ladies tried to distract me by singing nursery rhymes and gospel hymns, and anytime he got too close, they would roll down the windows and shout him back. He would disappear and reappear like clockwork until finally my sister appeared, gas can in hand and on the road behind us. I told my sister what had happened, and she said that the worst feeling had come over her and she was running the whole way back. The ladies surrounded us, forming a big circle around the car as my sister filled it with gas. The man was now standing 10 feet outside of the tree line, his clothes back on, watching us the whole time, and he looked and just never spoke as they told him to just leave us alone and not get any closer. When the car finally started, the lady said that they'd follow us to make sure that we'd make it home. We went up about half a mile and made a U-turn to head back, and as we crossed past the place that we'd been stranded, The man was on all fours again, completely nude, sniffing at the pavement where we'd been stranded. The old church van was behind us almost the whole way home, and I never took my eyes off of it. I was afraid that somehow the bad man would get us if they weren't there, but as we turned on our street, I lost sight of them, and they didn't turn in behind us, nor did I see a single vehicle pass on the cross street. Maybe they just turned around and just left, I thought at the time. My mother was waiting out on the front porch for us as we pulled up, and it was obvious that she'd been crying. She said that she'd gotten an awful feeling that something bad had happened and we'd been gone a long time. I told her everything that happened, and she called the police, who came to the house to take a statement. I thought that that was the last time that I'd ever hear about that bad man, but unfortunately, a couple of months later, I saw a news story about a girl that had gone missing from a park close to the area where her car had broken down, and witnesses said that the last they saw of her, she was talking to a tall, lanky man in an officer's uniform. Sometimes I think back on that night, and I shiver when I think of that bad man. Other times, though, I think of the ladies in the van and how they showed up just in time and how they just vanished without a trace. I wondered then, and I still wonder now, if maybe I was being protected. I'm not too sure, and I know that that whole thing just sounds a little bit crazy, but man, what a weird night. The following account happened several years ago in Nepal. I travelled there with my sister Em and two of her friends from high school, V and A. We'd hoped to escape the hustle and bustle of the city life and immerse ourselves in the mystical mountain paradise, to enjoy its culture as well as trek along one of the many Himalayan trails. However, limiting circumstances forced us to go during monsoon season, a combination of increasing heat and humidity that results in almost incessant rains. So, as you can imagine, there was scarcely a tourist to be found, especially on the hiking trek. Dense sopping clouds had snuffed out any meagre light, and milky fog obscured the view more often than not as we trudged along the circuit, but we had a blast nonetheless. The trek itself warrants a telling of its own, albeit a far less serious one, what with V falling victim to a battalion of bloodthirsty leeches lured out by rain, and A getting entangled in escapades, nearly getting knocked out cold from flirting with a farmer's wife. Though battered and bruised, we emerged from the trail victorious, though, and returned to the capital. Our flight back home was due the very next morning, which meant that we only had one day to explore Kathmandu. Kathmandu is quite a polarizing place, with labyrinthian streets and alleyways riddled with kitschy aesthetics and stimuli that push one's senses to their limits. Navigating Kathmandu by yourself, especially at night, is next to impossible, in fact. The heavily polluted air and suffocating traffic doesn't help either, and really, the only one among us who took a liking to the city was V, but she was always big on everything South Asian and was smitten by the various temples. Which is why, with strain leaking from our muscles, our limbs jittering from our 2-week-long odyssey, we were dragged along and subjected to her ministrations on spiritualism and greater meaning and whatnot. By the time that we staggered out of our final sightseeing destination, the Monkey Temple, it was almost dark. Well, we kept casting apprehensive looks backwards, prepared to fend off the prowling gangs of thieving monkeys skittering in our wake, looking for any opportunity to dispose us of food or the next best thing. One of the little buggers actually took off with my glasses, in fact. As we were descending into the city, having left the temple grounds, our luck got cursedly worse. We heard thunder echoing back on itself in the distance. Clouds, feathery and alive, billowed up at an alarming rate, their colour morphing from shades of purple to jet black, flecked with lightning. It started raining too, and heavy rain that pummeled us as we sought shelter. We splashed through ditches already knee-deep with rainwater and hurtled down alleyways where we hid under a tin roof at the side of the road, our drenched clothing clinging to our skin. Just as we were catching our breaths, a flurry of wet motion appeared in the corner of my eyes. My sister, Em, had darted onto the road and swung her hands upwards. She was always spontaneous and decisive, explosively so in fact, and when she spotted distant white headlights, barely discernible through the downpour, she gambled on it being a taxi, and it paid off. We clambered into the Suzuki with a collective sigh of relief, the prospect of immediate shelter overshadowing the struggle to create space for our bags within the tiny vehicle. It was an impossibly tight fit, but we somehow managed. The scruffy-headed driver, whose calm and deliberate tone of speaking weirded us out a bit, turned around in the near-pitch blackness of the taxi and asked us with a toothy grin where to. We looked at each other in momentary confusion before realizing that we hadn't accommodated this final day spent in Kathmandu into our plan, and because of our unfamiliarity with the city, had no idea what to say. The driver seemed to pick up on this, though, and didn't hesitate to suggest taking us to the Cousins' Hostel, an excellent establishment if he were to be believed. Out of options and utterly exhausted, we just meekly consented. With thinly masked glee in his face, he told us that we'd love it there and that the first round of drinks was on him. Careening through the streets, we tried to respond to the driver's prying small talk, but the hypnotic ding of rainfall on the roof was all it took. As I watched the blur of passing objects and people through the rain-speckled window, like wavy apparitions, I plunged into sleep. When I woke up, we were still in the car and everybody else was asleep, and in spite of the piss-poor visibility and my grogginess, it was evident that we were in a completely different part of the city now. But there was little to no street lighting, and all I could make out were jagged outlines of poles and looming concrete walls and structures. But no people were to be seen, and unease crept up on me. How long had we been driving for? Where exactly was this person taking us? What quelled my suspicion, and what made us go along with such a shady plan to begin with, was the perceived nature of the people of Nepal. Every single Nepali that we came across was welcoming and kind to a T, which, along with the supposed safety of the country, had lulled us into a false sense of security. It hadn't occurred to us that this fickle trust could be easily exploited. The driver had noticed that I was awake and flashed that toothy grin at me, telling me that it was good timing and to wake the others. When I stepped out of the car onto the muddy, deserted street, I couldn't help but feel the sense of unease sliding through me again. It was a sentiment, too, that was beginning to be shared with the others as we took in this Cousins' Hostel. We were taken aback, though. Mold-flecked walls with degraded and worn renderings surrounded a house that, despite being camouflaged by the darkness and rain, was unmistakably dilapidated. Granted, it was only marginally worse than the rest of Kathmandu's post-earthquake infrastructure, but it gave off a disconcerting air of ruin. In other words, no way in hell were we about to stay here. At least one of us was preparing to voice disapproval of the entire situation when the driver started bounding around and, in a very animated manner, attempted to usher us through the opened rusted gate into the awaiting yard. We complied, but only to get out of the rain, as it was now flooding over the alleyways created by the narrow lanes of houses and carrying with it its swirling refuse. When we stepped inside, we were met with a carnival of just disgusting imagery, illuminated by a single dim light bulb suspended from tarp that covered most of the yard. Revulsion and dread supplanted whatever unease that we might have harbored, because it was just beyond repulsive. But what I can only describe as a sickening miasma covered everything, and it just reeked of foul odor that made my eyes water. The concrete ground was littered with waste, and the walls smudged with caked dirt. The single plastic table was just smeared with who knows what. And I shit you not, there were needles just scattered everywhere. We immediately knew that we needed to get the hell out of there. But it was only when we turned around and looked at the driver under the light that the seriousness of our predicament fully dawned on us. This man looked like diseased roadkill. Sunken, bloodshot eyes stared at us from a face that was just covered with livid sores and scratches. His toothy grin now revealed decayed and cracked teeth, and we were definitely in a drug addict's den. Holy shit, V, I thought. How did you not notice? I mean, you were sitting right next to him. I wasn't sure how to react at this point. He was just standing there, blocking the gate, staring us down. He obviously didn't pose much of a threat. I mean, there were 4 of us against one frail drug addict meth head. Well, 3 of us at least. V's always scared easily, and as I glanced at her, I noticed that she was visibly shaking. She'd be useless should things escalate into a confrontation, verbal or otherwise. A, too, for all his loud bravado, he was the first to peel when shit hit the fan. I was starting to get really nervous at this point. I mean, what if he had a weapon on him? A used syringe which he'd lash out at us or something. The last thing I wanted was for one of us to contract something. My mind was racing. How were we going to leave? I was certain that there wasn't a taxi within miles of this deserted hellhole, that's for sure. And where were we to begin with? Our phones were useless without local numbers. I cursed myself for being this obliviously careless. As I was being dissolved by the acids of anxiety, M spoke up. Honestly, she was everything one could possibly want in a leader. Level-headed and perceptive, and she managed to bolster our confidence by taking control. She calmly addressed the driver, trying to explain to him that we'd forgotten to take care of something and that we'd need to rush back to town. We'd pay him double the fare for the trouble, but he wasn't having any of it. With wild gesticulations and an irritated tone, he started speaking rapidly. We barely comprehended him in his frantic state. He was saying that it would be impossible to drive back under these conditions and that our best bet was to just wait it out at the bar. He stressed multiple times that the first round was on him, as if that would entice us. He pointed towards the house, and it's then that we noticed the interior of the house was completely dark. The wide doorless entrance like an ominous invitation into nothingness that lay beyond, threatening to swallow whoever dared to approach. He told us to follow him inside for the drinks and started waving his hand as if time was of the essence. He was starting to rile me up, and I felt like giving him a verbal beatdown, but as if sensing that, Em reacted. She realized how important it was to keep level-headed and told him coolly that we simply had no time, and if he wasn't capable of driving, then he would help us contact another taxi or something. He either didn't understand or willfully ignored her and kept urging us to come inside with him, though. It got to the point that he just kept repeating the same thing over and over, eyes dimmed to a sickly grey and flesh sunk at the side of his mouth. He kept insisting. And if this wasn't all enough, there was a very hostile air about him too. He looked like he was making a concerted effort not to lunge at us, fidgeting with shaking hands. If necessary, I wouldn't have felt bad for a second to topple him like a sack of laundry if he so much as tried anything. V spurted out, very unspiritual-like, "Fuck this, let's just leave." At this, he surprisingly went quiet, as if unsure what to do faced with our departure. He turned around and stared at the house and then back at us. He hissed, "Okay, I get phone." With surprising agility, he scurried off towards the entrance too and disappeared into the darkness. We looked at each other and there was a momentary silence, the only sound that of the rain beating against the tarp and lightning booming in the distance. V again says, "Fuck this," traces of panic in her voice this time. She says, "This isn't normal, we need to leave now." I said, "And go where? You saw for yourself that there's not a soul out there and it's raining cats and dogs." Despite trying to be the voice of reason, I knew Em felt the same thing all of us did, a lingering sense of dread that something was just horribly wrong. A was fidgeting too now. Fear had obviously burrowed into his heart, and I too felt afraid. That's when we heard it though. The faint rustling coming from inside the house. Crackling, followed by the unmistakable sound of whispering. My heart was now beating like a drum. I felt jelly-legged and none of us moved a muscle. We were all petrified. The whisperings continued too, and they were just barely discernible through the rain, but loud enough to be picked up. With my eyes trained on the blackness of the entrance, I slowly started inching backwards, and the others followed suit. Just as we were turning around, it happened. The sound of heavy footsteps rushing us, a stampede emanating from within. We bolted, dashing through the gate into the street, and from the corner of my eye, I saw 4 of them mere steps behind us, with another bounding through the house entrance. They started shouting and shrieking at us as we hurtled down the street, sprinting desperately before turning to a side road. One of them threw something at us, in fact, and it fell short and landed with a sickening thud behind me. We ran blindly and turned corner after corner, knowing that a single misstep would kill any of us. V was falling behind us, though, panting like a horse pushed far beyond its limits. Thankfully, the shouting was becoming fainter and fainter, though. We kept running, not daring to catch our breaths or reorientate ourselves, simply following M's lead through roads and alleyways. At one point, I thought my heart would burst. And just when I was ready to give up, V almost out of sight too, we finally spotted headlights. We must have seemed like lunatics, surrounding the car left and right and center, banging on the windows, screaming for help. It was a miracle the driver, an elderly man, decided to help us at all, in fact. We clambered inside, gasping and heaving, and we wasted no time telling him to hightail it out of there. It took us the better part of an hour to calm down, and V was just hysterical. A's entire frame was trembling, but once this experience infiltrated our minds, we just never felt safe, even when stepping onto the aeroplane out of Nepal the next morning. We decided against going to the police in the end. I mean, we had no evidence, and even if we did, we had no way of finding that house again. Our backpacks were lost, of course. Mam's forethought of keeping our passports in her waistpack spared us much suffering, luckily. To this day, I'm still filled with dread at the thought of that entrance into darkness, with murderers lying in ambush. It was 2004 and I was 19, and my friend, B, was renting the upstairs bedroom of a house that everyone knew as the murder house. You see, in 1987, a man was shot in this house. He ran outside and banged on the neighbor's door, leaving a blood smear on the door and a trail of blood from the house. No one answered, and he was dragged back into the house by 2 men and brought to the basement, where he was shot in the head and subsequently dismembered. And the men took his remains and dumped them in a reservoir. So yeah, this was our little town's dark secret. But B had been living there for a few months, and I would come over most nights after I finished work. I was delivering pizzas, so I always had cash from tips, and we'd do what 19-year-olds do, try and get some beer or whatever. Funny enough, we'd usually just hang out with whatever was around and put some music and play rummy. I know, hard partying, right? But he never felt uneasy in the house. He never bought into the whole haunted house aspect. Despite that, though, he just never went into the basement. No one, except the owner, in fact, went into the basement. It wasn't a rule or anything. We could do whatever we wanted there, really, but the basement was just no. So one summer night in June, we're all at our friend Todd's house. He was older, but a cool guy, and he didn't mind a bunch of teenagers hanging out. He liked the party scene, I guess, and so we were there. It was me, B, a girl named AJ, and C. We were all broke at the time, and Todd had some other friends over, more his age, that we just didn't feel like hanging out with, so B says that we should just go to his place and figure out what we're going to do for the night. AJ and C take her car, and I take B in my shitty old Toyota pickup that forever smelled like Pizza Hut. B's house was only a couple of blocks away, and we get there and head upstairs to his room. This being 2004, not everyone had cell phones yet. Only AJ had one, so we were all trying to think of who to call to salvage the night and whatnot. There was no luck, so I put in a CD, and we just proceeded to go to the old reliable boring deck of cards. It was just the four of us in the house. The owner of the home had his dog in the room right next to us. He was rarely home at night though, and his room had a window that overlooked the front yard and the street. We barely got the first round started when we began to hear footsteps on the stairs. Must be Frank coming home, B said. We didn't think too much of it until we heard the front door open and close and then more steps on the stairs. We all looked at each other and checked the window, and we didn't see anything suspicious, but we also didn't see Frank's car. We heard footsteps coming up a third time, and B and I had had enough, and we were going to confront whoever was trespassing. We were both 19, and I had been a football player in high school and was still in pretty good shape. B had never played sports, but was in a similar condition as me. Basically, we could have held our own in a fistfight if need be, but usually we could just intimidate people into backing off. So, it's about midnight and we head down the stairs. AJ and C stay up in the room. We were both pumped up, ready to go kick out any drunk or meth head that happened to just wander in. We don't see anyone and nothing looks out of place though. We go outside and sit on the porch and nothing seems odd. There's regular traffic on the semi-busy street, but I start to get the feeling that just something's wrong. That something feels off. I see things in the front yard that look like they're moving, like shadows darting around. I kind of dismiss it as me being tired and my eyes just playing tricks on me. That is, until B asks me if I'm seeing the shadows moving. I ask him, "Yeah, you're seeing this too, huh?" I go into the yard at this point and look up into Frank's bedroom window. There's a lamp on, giving off just enough light to see the bedroom door and the dresser. I look at it for a minute when I see something. I say to B, "Dude, there's something in the bedroom." He replies with, "It's just the dog." "No, it's not. That's not a dog. It's kind of black," and the black creature comes into full view of the window at this point. It looked like it was just made out of oil. Not quite solid, but not translucent either. It moved from the window to the dresser to the door and then just disappeared. "What the fuck are you talking about?" B asks, still on the porch. I don't know, man. I don't know what it was, but I don't even know if I saw anything. It may have just been my eyes fucking with me. I walked back up the steps onto the porch and noticed an old mirror that had been left by the door. I remembered hearing stories about people using mirrors to see ghosts, so I figured why not. B had gone into the yard to try and see what was in the bedroom at this point too. I stare into the mirror for a few minutes when I see a black oily ball floating down one of the pillars behind me. Dude, there's something floating. It looks like a little ball of," I said. The ball disappeared out of view of the mirror and reappeared behind me, huge this time and black. A translucent black oil behind my reflection. I couldn't see the yard anymore and I couldn't see B, and for a moment, all I could see was me, the porch, and this thing coming behind me. And then I felt it. Fingers made of ice entered into my shoulders and pulled me backwards. It's an impossible feeling to describe, but every time I think about it, I can kind of feel it. I bolt away from the mirror and I say something just went through me. Something, that black thing, it grabbed me and it pulled me backwards. I was done at this point and B was freaked too. So we hustled over to the gas station down the street to call AJ from the payphone and have her and C get my keys and shit and just get the hell out of that house. AJ asks us, "Where are you guys? And we heard you guys walk up the stairs, but you never came in." I say, "I'll explain later, just grab my keys and CDs and meet us outside." Back at the cars, I told them what happened and what I saw, and I don't know if they believed me or not, but all I knew is that I was terrified. After that incident too, I never went back to that house, and B moved out a short time later. Oh, and if you're interested, You can do a YouTube search for the Boyce Murder House, and you can find news stories about the place there. Thanks for listening. So, to start, my boyfriend and I had just bought a house together. It's a lovely two-story home with an attic, a basement, and a two-door garage as well, and we got it for a steal. But with that, we have no seller's agreement. But the owner has never seen the home, probably inherited it, to be honest. Either way, we were in a pinch, having been evicted from our apartment and taking care of foster pets. It narrowed our options, as many renters around here don't allow pets. So, before I get to the main story, some backstory on us. I'm a 20-year-old female and my boyfriend is a 30-year-old male. I'm pretty skeptical about things like this too, but that doesn't mean I haven't seen some things personally that really do make me wonder. Those are stories for another day, but what I'm about to tell you is about something that I had always thought was an old wives' tale. But now, I don't know anymore. Anyway, I'll call my boyfriend P for now. We also moved in with a good friend of mine and her boyfriend. They rent a room from us, and it helps with the mortgage for sure. But they're 3 and 4 years younger than me, and I'll call the girl M and her boyfriend E. Now, E and I had set up a man cave of sorts in the basement. We game and drink and basically just sort of do our nightly routines of getting some distance from our partners down there. Meanwhile, P and M set up workstations in the attic. More of a refined space for them for writing and tinkering with old typewriters and whatnot. We've been settling into the new house for a couple of months now, getting used to its pops and creaks, and it's an older house built in the 1920s, and my neighbours sort of have mice on their side of the attic, so you can hear them skittering about and above your head. In this time, I've been noticing some small things that seem odd though. The upstairs bathroom kind of gurgles, if that's the right way to say it, but only I've ever heard it. When I asked P, M, and E, none of them had heard the same noise. It was weird, but whatever. Downstairs, we also have another bathroom almost directly under the upstairs bathroom, just past the kitchen. Now, my cat follows me everywhere in the house, squeaking at me to hold him and just generally being a cute cat, but he won't follow me into the bathroom without being coerced. He'll just sit there and kind of manically squeak at me until I usher him in. When he does finally decide to follow me in, he locks eyes with a portion of the hallway and won't break eye contact with it. And then he'll run to me while staying low to the ground. I know that this is a sign of fear, but he has no reason for it, and I just can't explain it. And aside from that, he's recently started going into the bathroom by himself and just howling at the wall. It's weird, but cats, right? Now, E and I have our setup in the basement, which gives me the creeps, to be honest. I wouldn't spend much time in it at all until I put a huge sheet of fabric along the walls that looks like a vertical striped wallpaper. Now, when I put this up, I made sure to cover a doorway that leads to a small room under my front porch. Something about that room just bothers me, and it feels like it's watching you. In between the matches of the game that I play, a sudden realization that I have that feeling again always comes upon me too. And every time, it's always that same room. It has no door, and I occasionally still feel it despite covering it. My cat avoids it too. But just last week, he told me about an event that he went through while I was sitting right next to him. We had both been gaming and had some time between matches and decided to shoot the shit and complain about shitty teammates. But the usual MOBA player bullshit, right? Anyway, he tells me later that during a chat, he had hallucinated his girlfriend M walking downstairs and into the basement with us, but when he turned to talk to her, she just wasn't there. I just kind of laughed it off, as he spends a lot of time smoking and maybe he was just confused. But earlier tonight, while I was in the basement alone, I heard Someone opened the basement door and heard and saw Em walk down the stairs and behind me towards a chair or a cigarette or something. But when I turned to her to talk to her, there was no one there. I immediately looked behind me, but there was no one in the room. I looked in the entire basement and even called for her, but nothing. Once I realized she wasn't there, my cat howled and just booked it right up the stairs. I sat confused for a few minutes and told my buddies that I'd been gaming with that I'd be AFK for a bit. I felt almost lost, to be honest. I decided to text Em though from the basement, but sure enough, she hadn't come down the stairs at all. She'd been up in her workroom for hours, which means that whole time she was 2 full stories above me. So then, what did I just see? Or better yet, who did I just see? My father died in 2008 when I had just completed my high schooling and we were in enormous amounts of debt. I still am in poverty, but that story can be told another day. So, to continue my studies, I needed to find work, and for 3 years I sold picados on the street and taught little children maths. In 2012, I was recruited into an ISP in our small town to work the night shift. During the interview, I was particularly asked if I would feel scared to stay alone at night in the 3rd story of the enormous building with one security guard in the ground floor. I was never comfortable, but I needed the job. Plus, being at a night shift, I could attend my college during the day and all that. So, I worked in that office between February of 2012 to August of 2013, and during this time, I never got curious to ask anyone why no one wanted to work at night. I heard, before me, that someone used to work at night, but he just left abruptly. My work was to pick calls from clients who would have problems with their internet connection and provide simple solutions. Anything complex, and I had to note down their names and address and pass the list to my senior via email, and technicians would take care of them during the next day. It was a simple job, and I wouldn't receive many calls, and so by 11, I would just spread out a thick blanket on the floor and fall asleep with the receivers beside my head in case somebody phoned. June 2013, though, was the month that I found out why no one was ready to work at night. That night, the security guard with whom I had developed a very close friendship came to the 3rd floor and asked me if he could sleep in my room as there were too many mosquitoes in the ground floor. I understand that he was supposed to stay awake, but he used to take advantage of my altitude and sleep every night, and the whole building had no security camera. Anyway, we were both sleeping in the same room. The 2 receivers were on either sides of my head and the lights were turned off. I had locked the door loosely, keeping the lights on in the corridor. And at 3 a.m, I woke up to a sound as if someone was walking with his feet dragging to the floor. It was a really strange sound and really loud too. I was facing the door and could see the light on the other side of the door through the thin gap between the floor and the door. I stayed down, staring directly at the gap, trying to understand what or who it was, and as I waited, the sound got louder and louder, and soon I saw feet of someone crossing my door. My heartbeat got faster, but I thought that it must have been the security guard, but when I looked behind me, he was fast asleep. My blood froze at this, and the sound started to get louder again, and soon the feet appeared near my door. This time, instead of just crossing my door, it stopped there too and didn't move. I waited for whoever it was to move away, but he wouldn't. And then I did the stupidest thing. I thought it could be an intruder, and instead of waking up the security guard quickly, I tiptoed to the door while the thing still stood there and pulled it open suddenly. And there was no one, but a gust of wind hit my face, causing me to get goosebumps all over. I woke up the guard now and explained to him everything. He took out his torch and turned on all the lights and searched the whole building, but couldn't find anyone. Finally, he came to me and said that it could be a demon. Well, after that, I couldn't sleep again. I dropped messages to those who worked during the day explaining this shit too, and I reached the office the next day a little early to catch the others. This was when the story started to emerge too. But one explained to me that he had the night shift a few days and he would always hear someone climbing up and down the stairs in the middle of the night. Another said that he saw a chair being moved around from one corner of the terrace to another by something that wasn't visible. And that was apparently why no one would like to work at night and stayed there for more than a year. I left the company in August after they gave me an increment of $3 after working for more than 1 year. They used to pay me $54 a month, and yes, I know, the salary is scarier than the story, but I needed to grasp anything that I could find to complete my bachelor's degree. I used to attend college in the morning and teach from afternoon to twilight and then go to the office. The cost of education and staying alive plunged me into further debt from which I'm yet to recover completely. But they install cameras in the office these days, and I sometimes wonder if they've been able to capture anything. I have plans to upload my personal paranormal stories, including this one, to my newly opened channel, Many Realities, someday, where I share strange but real stories of people around the world that defy explanation. I'd love to see you there, but that was my story, and man, it was weird. So my parents divorced when I was really young. I do remember after the divorce that they both lived in apartments in the middle of Tennessee. Well, not long before I was to start kindergarten, my mum remarried to my stepdad and we moved to a small house in the middle of nowhere, Alabama, about 30 miles outside of Birmingham. It was in a good school district and near my stepdad's family, who would be helping with my brand new little sister. This was actually a really exciting time for my other little sister and me, and we finally had cousins, aunts and uncles and grandparents that we would get to see all the time instead of traveling for the holidays to New England or Florida only once or twice a year. We didn't even care that they were all step-family, we were just happy to be around other people. But the cousins that we saw most were Brady and Micah. Their mum and our mum worked odd jobs to make ends meet and helped each other out with childcare while my stepdad worked as a truck driver and Uncle Randy worked as an EMT ambulance driver. So our house was an odd setup. We lived in a little 2-room house that actually sat almost right behind a large old farmhouse that no one lived in. Whenever Brady and Micah would come and visit, we would always end up going through the house and always wondered why it was still set up like a house since no one lived there. The beds in the bedrooms were made, there were a couple of plates in the sink in the kitchen for the last few years. It was like someone just left for work one day and never came home. So after a day of playing in the house, I found a plate in the kitchen that I thought was very pretty. I knew that we were about to go visit my grandparents in Florida for the summer and thought that it would be a perfect gift for my Southern Belle plate-collecting grandmother. I took it back home and my mum helped me clean it and get it ready that evening before sending me off to bed. After my mum sent me to bed, she followed her nightly routine of smoking a cigarette, dumping the ashtray, sweeping off the porch before locking it, and then watching the nightly news before going to bed herself. While she was in bed, she kept smelling a burning cigarette though. She couldn't figure out why though, and even got up to check the garbage to make sure that her last one was not still lit. And it wasn't. So she went back to bed. She's almost asleep, convinced that the smell is just stuck in her nose, when all the lights in her room turn on. She turns to get out of bed and comes face to face with me, standing next to her bed, clutching my blanket and crying. She asks me why I turned on all the lights, and I just break down crying and barely get the words out. I say that I didn't turn on any lights, not even the ones in our room or in the living room. Carolyn did it. I told her to stop and turn the lights back off, but she just laughed at me. My mum was really confused and asked who Carolyn was. I explained that Carolyn is my friend that I made. Normally she just turns on some lights at night, and she didn't have lights in her house next door until she was 6 like me and likes to play with them. but when I tell her to stop and go home to sleep, she turns off the lights and walks away. But tonight, she turned on all the lights, and when I told her to stop, she laughed at me and walked into our closet instead of going home. And now, she doesn't want to leave, even though I want her to, and she made fun of me. My mum got out of bed and picked me up, and as she was carrying me back to my room, she quickly discovered that every light, every lamp, every ceiling light, even the pull chain lamp under the kitchen counter, they were all on. She took me to my room and laid me in bed and checked the closet just to make sure that Carolyn wasn't in there, and turned off the bedroom light so that my sisters wouldn't wake up. She went out into the hall and reached for the light switch, but before she could even touch it, every light in the house just went off. My mum was convinced that we had lost power, so she hit the light switch to check, and the whole light came back on like normal. As odd as it was, she just put it down to faulty electrics and went back to bed. As she laid in bed, the cigarette smell came back though, and she sat up trying to remember if she smelled it while dealing with me, or if she was just too preoccupied and freaked out to notice. While she was trying to remember, she heard the screen door to the back porch open and slam shut again. Of course, she knew that she had locked it before going to bed, so she wasted no more time and picked up the phone and called Uncle Randy, since this was before the prevalence of cell phones, and it wasn't like my stepdad would be able to make it from Arkansas back to Alabama in any time quick enough for the circumstances anyway. So, for 12 minutes, my mum just sat frozen in her bed, scared to move, listening for any other sign of an intruder or that of any of the three of us had woken up. Then she heard a car pull up into the driveway, followed by Randy banging on the screen door and yelling her name. She ran to the kitchen and threw open the back door, turned on the back porch light, and immediately saw it. Between her and Randy were about 20 burnt cigarette butts and cigarette ashes just strewn across the floor that she had just cleaned an hour before, and a locked screen door. So, to start, I need to give some background. I'm a male who lives in a relatively nice neighborhood. It's your average small-town run-of-the-mill suburbs area with a lot of people there. I'm a college kid who's home on break while my parents have gone away, which doesn't help at all. I also have a 2-story house, and I don't have a gun, or nor do I have any real weapons other than kitchen knives. I'm not on any medication, and I have no record of schizophrenia or any other mental illness. I barely have any relationships with my neighbors, most of whom are elderly, and the rest I have minimal contact with. I don't have any people in my neighborhood that I know of anyway who have any reason to attack or harm me too. So, let's get into what's happening. About 2 nights ago, I woke up very late in the night and I went to the bathroom to go and take a dump. Now, my 2nd-story bathroom has a window that can see the entirety of my backyard. But directly behind it is a cul-de-sac which you can see directly into. There's a group of trees and a pile of rocks and mulch that divides it. Usually I can see everything in my back room without turning anything on because lights from my neighbor's house dimly light the room. And as I'm using the toilet, I look outside and I notice there's a car parked directly facing my house in the cul-de-sac. Now, if you've ever seen a cul-de-sac before, you would know that when you park, you always either park next to the curves or the sides of the street. This car was directly facing the curve behind my house, though. I thought that this was pretty strange, considering whoever parked must have been there to visit someone, but if that were the case, then why would they not have parked in one of the driveways? The people who lived behind me were both elderly too, so they probably didn't have some big block party I didn't know about or anything, and even then, only an idiot would park like that. As I stared into the car, I could distinguish a figure in the driver's seat, just sitting there. Since the lights were not on in my bathroom, whoever was in the car probably couldn't see me through that window. At this point, I was determined to see who the fuck was in there, so I went downstairs and got my binoculars from my dad's closet and went back to my bathroom to see who was there. Keep in mind that this is 3 in the fucking morning, and I mean, what person would be in their car just sitting there in the middle of the winter? Anyway, as I go into my bathroom, I looked outside to find nothing. The car had just since left. I thought it was a relief, seeing as I probably was just freaking out over nothing, and the person was just leaving whoever they were visiting or something. But then again, what are the odds that the moment that I notice the car, that's the moment that the person leaves? Either way, I finally calmed myself down and just went back to sleep. But the next day, a mix of boredom and paranoia got the better of me, and I decided it was time for some investigation. I go to my backyard cul-de-sac to see if there was any trace of the person who was there last night, and there was nothing. I go to my neighbors to see if they had anybody over the other night. Maybe it would just clarify why the fuck somebody would be parked there in the first place. I asked both the owners of the 2 houses on the curves of the cul-de-sac, all of whom said that they didn't have any visitors, and I asked for the numbers and I left. This is when my paranoia really started to kick in a bit. This was a little messed up. I had no clue whether the person was coming back later, and I can't call the police as they won't respond to a complaint that isn't even valid. So I decided to wait until later to see if the person came back. I spent that night just talking with my college friends about it over a video chat, all of whom thought I was either making it up or just freaking out over nothing. I sign off and watch Netflix until it's pretty late. The entire time, I just kept thinking about looking at my window to check, but since my friends had told me that I was worrying about nothing, and also since I'm a bit of a coward, I must admit, I just never checked. Finally, the clock ticked 3:24 a.m., the exact time I woke up the night before, and I thought, fuck it, might as well check to be sure. And this is where I absolutely shit myself. The same exact car was parked, and there was a man in a black hoodie and a ski mask standing right next to it, just staring at my house. I immediately ran to get my phone and dialed my neighbors, none of which answered, mind you. I ran back to the window, only to see that he was now standing in my fucking backyard. This was no longer a burglary attempt, because if it was, he would be looking through my lower house windows trying to break in or something. This had to be some sort of stalker, I thought at this point. I decided fuck this and opened up my window and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Who the fuck are you?" There was no response, so I yelled, "I'm going to call the fucking police, get off my property." And finally, the man spoke. He said, "Have a nice day," in like a cheery way that a cashier at the store would say it when you're leaving. The man waltzed, and I mean literally waltzed like a happy cartoon character, back to his car and just left. Well, obviously, I called the police department immediately. They asked me if I had any friends who were trying to play a prank on me, and I said no. And like I said though, this town is relatively small and the police did jack shit. They told me that if it happens again to call them immediately. So, I'm shitting myself right now. It's currently 11 p.m. and God knows if he'll be back tonight. I'm going to be looking out my window all night, just waiting for him, and I'll keep you all in touch if anything happens. Wish me luck. Edit, 12:24 a.m. So, I'm currently staring outside looking out my window, just waiting for the man to come, and I've informed my neighbors about his arrival, and they told me that they're also on the lookout. I must admit that I feel pretty nervous, but at least I have my neighbors helping me out too, right? I just want this to be over, to be honest. 1:24 a.m. Nothing has shown up yet. I got a call from my mum about a half an hour ago, in fact. I haven't told them about any of the shit happening. I just told her that I loved her and hung up on the phone. My friends have been Snapchatting me though, asking me about this shit, and I said that I'll try to get a picture if I can. If I do, I'll make sure that I send it to you guys too. 1:34 a.m. So, the neighbors said that they see a car parked up the street from them. One of my neighbors, who's in his mid-40s, says that he's going to go check it out. My foot is tapping the floor like crazy now. 1:37 a.m. False alarm. Turns out it was just the car of a family who just got home. Fuck me, though. This suspense is making me feel ill. 1:48 a.m. One of the neighbors says that he's going to sleep for the night. Now, that's not good, but I just hope the rest of them hold out for me until the rest of the night. I don't know if I'm going to be able to fall asleep at all tonight. I mean, I've already chugged 2 cups of coffee and I'm as alert as possible. 2:11 a.m. Hey, I was looking at my window when I heard something in the bushes of my backyard. I couldn't tell whether it was the guy, the wind, or just some stupid animal, so I shined and turned on the light in my backyard and saw nothing. I think this paranoia is starting to get to me. 2:17 a.m. Alright, it's official. I'm losing my shit here. I heard something crash in my kitchen and I ran down to see what was happening. Some pan had fallen off over from the shelf. Nothing notable, but it scared the absolute shit out of me. I went back upstairs to start looking out the window again at one of the streets right off my backyard, which is about 200 yards away, I'd say. Through the trees, I also saw a car at the corner flashing its brights repeatedly and then making a right, driving away from the street leading to my house. I don't know what the fuck is going on, but is this guy taunting me? 2:40 a.m. Hey, so I'm currently at my neighbor's house just staring into my backyard, the cul-de-sac. I walked out my back door and just sprinted and rang the doorbell as fast as possible. They saw me and opened the door immediately, luckily. It was honestly the scariest shit that I've ever done. I was worried that he was going to pull up any second, in fact. But now I just wait and hope for the best, I guess. 2:51 a.m. So, nothing out of the ordinary has happened, but I am dreading what will happen at 3:24, though. I saw 2 cars pass by my house, though. I couldn't tell if they were the same car as the one the stalker was using, though. Also, I couldn't tell if it was the same car just passing by both ways. Is this guy playing tricks on my mind? I'm ready to dial 911 at any second. I called my parents too and told them what was happening, and they said that they'll be on their way home tomorrow. 3:01 a.m. Yeah, guys, this guy's definitely coming. A car came up the street on the cul-de-sac and started flashing its high beams again and left. He's definitely trying to fuck with my mind. Thank God I left the house, though, because the direction he's going is definitely coming back around to my house. Honestly, I'm pretty scared, and I'm not even in the house anymore. At the moment I even see him outside his car, I'm definitely calling the police. 3:11 a.m. So, my neighbor and I both agreed that we're going to leave the house and drive to the police station as soon as we see him parked near my house. My heart is racing, and I can't believe that I had just waited in my house alone for the past couple of hours. What the hell was I thinking? So, it's 3:20 a.m. now, and still nothing yet. Even if he doesn't come, though, I sure as hell am not going back. I'm not even sure if I'll stay here too. This is the scariest shit that's ever happened to me. 3:25 a.m. Guys, someone is parked in my fucking driveway. I'm getting the fuck out of here right now. I'll try to update you guys on my mobile or later when they arrest this guy, but I'm leaving now. 1:15 p.m. For those of you who are concerned, I'm alive. I went to the police station and I've been questioned and they're working on finding the guy. But they haven't found him yet, unfortunately, and I went to a hotel and got some sleep and I just woke up. I'll share more with you guys soon, but right now I'm just taking some time to get this sorted out. Oh, and thanks for the support, everyone.